The Skelly, the undead hero, Dan the Man, the indefatigable Wigginbottom, truly the man of many names. Galamir's One-Eyed Knight continues to rest within the hearts of passionate fans to this day. Today, one of those fans, yours truly here, would like to explore with you the levels of the MediEvil series and see how they compare to one another. I believe the cool kids online call this a ranking. Yes, we will be ranking the levels of MediEvil, MediEvil 2, and MediEvil Resurrection. I'll also make the odd shout out to the more recent remake of the first title in 2019, but only here and there, as the focus will remain within the titles on the original consoles, the PlayStation and PSP. What's going on, everyone? I'm EJ Fortesque, and I'd like to welcome you to the channel. I'll be your host this fine day as we look at 60 levels from the MediEvil series ranked worst to best. MediEvil is a very special series to me, and has always been one of my favorites. In the year of '98, there was a certain demo disc from this series of PlayStation Underground collections that you would get to try before the games came out. The one I'm talking about actually included a few notable ones, including Spyro the Dragon, Metal Gear Solid, Tomb Raider I think was on there, even Toy Soldiers which was an interesting game for the time. But it had MediEvil on there with a couple of levels, and for some reason that left a mark on me, and I've been impacted as a fan ever since. We're going to be here a while today, so I highly encourage you to get yourself a nice cup of coffee or tea, lemonade, juice, something harder if you like, whatever it is you wish. Please just sit back, put your feet up, and enjoy your time here. Criteria for ranking each level will be executed as follows. We will explore the overall design of the level, of course, meaning we will remark on how pleasing it is to traverse, how various avenues and pathways connect, and how clever the secrets are stashed within the layout, and so on. We will also note the general aesthetic, the usage of lighting and colors within your time there as a player, given that this is such a crucial component of enjoying the region. Music also, which hardly needs to be said given its ability to elevate the atmosphere and emotion within the player in this series as a result of the great work by Paul Arnold and Andrew Barnabas. Gimmicks within each level will also be analyzed and considered within their attempts to add uniqueness to each level, and how they succeeded or failed when experimented with. Finally, a variety of other things to consider, such as quality of boss fights, how long or short the level is and how that relates to its overall quality, skyboxes, etc. All of these together will compose a final opinion numerically for how I consider each level above or below another. I suppose I could add that this list is just my opinion. I'm positive at least a few of these placements will strike the viewer as odd, maybe even lacking any sense at all. I hope at the very least I can make somewhat of a reasonable case to you as to my opinion for each of the designs we're about to visit. Regardless, we are here to have fun and enjoy different opinions regarding our experiences. I very much look forward to hearing your own thoughts below. So, without further ado, let's begin. C'est parti, los geht's! A quick addendum before we begin with level 60, and that was that there were a few levels that were cut from the overall composition of levels that were in for consideration. And the big ones were really the hub worlds themselves. And it was for that very reason. They're hub worlds. So that would be the Hall of Heroes from MediEvil 1, Hall of Heroes from MediEvil Resurrection, and the Professor's Lab in MediEvil 2. They are all essential to their respective games in giving the player the experience in which they may pull back from the hack and slash chaos of the MediEvil worlds to be rewarded for their chalice collections, chat with others, and so on. It stops there, and so for that reason, I won't be including them in the list, but a shout out to the hub worlds. So, when it comes to number 60, what I had to think about, which was difficult, is basically, what level do I look forward to least, and which level do I think has the least redeeming qualities? Because I do honestly believe every level in the series of MediEvil has at least some redemption to it and something that allows it to come to some fruition, but just maybe fails. So this level, at the very bottom, is the one that I just don't think cut it either way. Here it is. Dragon Island. The cinematic intro of Dan's arrival is a good and wholesome laugh, a charming set piece perfectly characteristic of MediEvil's humor. Jeff's kiss. Unfortunately, the kiss is wasted on a dish served cold with what is in my view the most underwhelming of what the series has to offer. Dragon Island is an attempt to revise the Crystal Caverns from the original, and in essence toning it down to what is a boss battle without any other content. Put more candidly, it is what was once a great level stripped bare, the gloomy mystery suspended within the environment now gone, and having the player confined to what is a dull encounter. To stick with the chef analogy, it is like being originally served a delicious mutton ensemble and then being given a bone with barely any protein left to consume. You begin by gaining insight of the creatures that dwell here, if it isn't obvious enough, and a short path which seemingly builds up a little momentum prior to the main engagement. What's left here is another version of the dragon fight, where you must hit the earth at certain points with corresponding ceiling spaces that drop rocks down onto your foe. Like the original, you adapt by noting the patterns and adjusting your attacks accordingly. The one little twist in this level is that the dragon makes a grand entrance after being bonked so many times, which seemingly raises the stakes. But it is absolute tedium, simply requiring you to swing your weapon at opportune moments while avoiding his fire breath, chipping away at his unsatisfyingly large health bar. There's no fun to be had here, and I've never played this level with any feeling other than, let's just get this over with and grab the dragon armor. Their attempt at adding character to the dragon is also admirable, but is at a loss given how little this level has to offer. It is a massive downgrade from the level it is a shout out to, and my least favorite of the levels that you and I are looking at today. 59. Zarok's Lair, another resurrection piece and another boss-focused level. It's no secret to fans of MediEvil that it is replete with boss fights that lack the richness and spectacle of other games. There are definitely some notable exceptions, which we'll get to later on in this list, but Zarok's Lair from the PSP title is an example of something that definitely needed more care. It's almost entirely uneventful, a basic reskin of a final tussle with a different order of operations for the brawls that take place within Zarok's Pit. It begins with what's basic romp against a few waves of enemies, which at this point should be pretty facile. Lord Karok then takes the stage, though with no need for a proper strategy on your part, and no compelling moveset to leave you with any sense of achievement afterwards. It is after this where we repeat our battle against Zarok's soldiers with our own, passing on our health with the Anubis Stone, which was the chalice in the original, to empower their vitality as they slowly hack away, recompensating you a vial for each troop you're able to keep alive. Zarok decides in Resurrection to try a new form, which is a cool design all things considered, far greater than you in size and with a menacing presence that genuinely appears threatening, as a final boss should. But the fight is easy. Avoid his attacks, hit him in the face, attack his tail, rinse and repeat. This is extremely disappointing both as a boss fight and game ending, since this is when the game's composition should crescendo into something climactic in order to elevate your sense of achievement both in having reached this far and also in having overcome all the challenges and odds as Dan. It's instead another forgettable fight that follows with a cinematic, being whisked away back to your crypt, and then the credits. Fortesque deserves so much better than this. And on to 58, which is Welcome to the Sleeping Village. Sheesh, we're definitely giving Resurrection a hard time so far, but please bear with me, and I promise this game will get its roses later on. For now though, we need to continue with another region that I think is scratching the bottom. Let's start with the positive here. The town feels both lively and morose at once, with the looming sense of danger airing among the dim streets just as the original Sleeping Village accomplished. The steampunk guards are back again with a vengeance, having their difficulty increased and forcing old players to take greater caution with them than the original game. Seems fine as a level, right? No, unfortunately, and that's why it's so low. The level is shrunk to the point where any space of interest is rendered without any purpose, except to possess a couple guards here and there for you to fill the chalice with, which, as you see here, is not well hidden at all. Avenues and alleys are all closed off, and there are no interior regions to explore here. It is honestly just you meandering within a town square that serves as a front for the asylum, followed by the true experience of the sleeping village. The critical flaw with this level is that nothing here indicates its necessity as a level. Sure, there's a cinematic which constructs for the player why Zarok is here and why the mayor is of interest, but we don't get anything worthwhile otherwise. The music as well isn't fitting at all in my view. Reminiscent rather of the Time Machine or something a bit more upbeat for an environment, it just doesn't contrast the theme to me at all. So while visually the mood is well captured, there's an aching emptiness in its presence, and it's a wonder to me why the developers bothered with this entrance when there are a number of ways they could have introduced us to the next stages. At least the actual venture, in Resurrection Sleeping Village, will outdo the disappointment once we reach it. 57. The Ant Caves. The first on our list from the original game, and easily one of the most infamous of Dan's ordeals. Let's start with the positive again. That was fun last level. The mood is undeniably well conceived. Dark, dank, and alone against the odds, which extends your current predicament well given your shrunken size. The fairy hunt is a nice addition, adding a dynamic of exploration while hunting for pieces of amber. I actually have no idea what happens if you don't bring enough, as I've never had an issue finding the amount we need before reaching the level's completion. The near-Byzantine style of splitting and connecting various tunnels is something I personally quite like, still leaving me lost in subsequent playthroughs. Now, the negative, which is basically everything else. The ants here are bothersome and unrewarding to take down, becoming quickly monotonous in their soulless, literally, encounters at a near unceasing rate. The tedium sets in further when trying to decipher the exit's location while gathering what's needed, which can feel stressful given you really don't want to repeat this level. I know I have on at least one occasion dropped down to the Ant Queen before rescuing all the fairies, forcing me to redo the entire level if I wanted to claim entrance to the Hall of Heroes. Yes, I know, we have emulation today on versions like the PS5, but the vast majority of my experience with these games is on their native hardware. You've no idea how good you kids have it. Speaking of the Ant Queen, it could have aided this level in its overall quality, giving the player something to look forward to as a reward for their struggle to gather what the old coot above has requested. Rather, we get an encounter which expresses one of my biggest peeves in gaming, period. That is, when mobs are thrown into a boss fight. I'm sorry, my friends, but I've always regarded this as a form of lazy boss design, an attempt to decorate a battlefield or combat space with something to eat up time or compensate for some ill-considered factor built into the encounter. And what's worse, she merely raises herself up at certain points for you to attack, and then you're harassed yet with more mobs. What little this level excels in is wildly overwhelmed with its failures, and I can guarantee you that no fan of MediEvil watching this was expecting ant caves to make it past the bottom 10, even if they personally don't mind it. For me, it doesn't even crack the bottom 5, and that is saying something given that I hadn't yet mentioned it's an optional level. Still not enough for me, and is the lowest on the level roster of the original game. 56. Dan's Crypt from the original MediEvil. My friends, it actually hurts to put this so low. I wanted it to be higher, but I just couldn't. I'm not even sure what exactly I need to clarify as to why it's here, as everyone knows it can be done in a minute or two, but let's try anyway. Its glowing blue-lit vestibules and foyers grant a proper aura given the tomb setting, and the absence of foes presents you a soft landing for getting comfortable with the game's controls. Nothing inherently wrong with the given intent of having something short and sweet, and I have a soft spot for this short episode given it's the first ever gameplay I engaged in with this series 26 years ago. The purpose of making a list like this is to judge the quality of the content based on the intentions made by the developers, and it's clear they intended for this to be a quick warm-up before you go and venture into your first true region, the graveyard. That's all well and good. Except we do know from the breakable wall that there was the idea of returning here for the curious players, and they could have done even more with that. The canal, for instance, could have added a gargoyle next to one of these gridded waterways. You guys remember Fable, the demon doors? The said gargoyle could have been guarding one of these, and upon approaching, responding, "I've heard tales of a great and majestic sword with magical properties that exists somewhere, waiting for a hero to wield it with the valor it beckons. If I ever to see such a sword, I might be moved to open this entryway for you to see what's on the other side." Come on, it wasn't that bad. In Resurrection's Crypt, which we'll get to later, remedies this in some fashion, so I see something like this as a miss for the game's starting point. And that's the best summary I can give here. I don't dislike Dan's Crypt for what it does, but rather what it doesn't do. Oh well. Let's go to the graveyard. 55. The Ghost Ship. Look at that, the third MediEvil level in a row, after 3 consecutive Resurrection regions. 2 hat tricks. I promise that wasn't planned, I swear. I also imagine I've annoyed a few fans for putting this level so low, but give me credit. I did put it above Ant Caves. Friends, I've been playing this level since release, and I've never liked it. One of the few levels in the entire series I've never enjoyed. There's no changing my mind on how I fail to connect with this damn ship and its recalcitrant skeletal inhabitants. We'll start with one of the level's defining gimmicks, the captains. While a neat idea to have elite minions that act as life beacons for surrounding pirates, it's easy to pick up that you can just skip past everything and hammer away at them, leaving their followers to fall at his demise. It's an idea that needed more elevation, such as empowering the other skelly pirates and then draining them of said empowerment once defeated. It's clear the team was going for an obstacle course with the Ghost Pirate theme, and visually it stands out when considering the entire presentation, but in practice, not enjoyable. Don't even get me started on the cannon lids that lift and descend, leaving you to strict timing only to reach a life fountain. Like Pumpkin Gorge, we see more platforming here than other regions, but to no benefit of the player. The fall penalties are a major issue, as they're easy to commit and punishing in having to spend precious moments in navigating back upwards to try again. Don't be surprised if it happens to you multiple times, though in today's age you can rewind time after making a mistake if you're playing a certain version. I think that's perfectly acceptable for such an unforgiving level, unhelped by the finicky controls being tested here. The ultimate issue is that MediEvil is an action-adventure game with many elements that build it together, platforming being one of them. And Ghost Ship decides to prioritize platforming to the point where it thinks it's a completely different game, as though it's having an identity crisis. It thinks it's Mario or Crash or Croc. Dan's character movement just doesn't work with these kinds of maneuver requirements and verticalities, and leads to a lot of unsatisfying gameplay as a result. And to conclude, we face the big cheese himself by lighting a club followed by the conveniently placed cannons as he struts to and fro. Waves of pirates, hey, we just complained about that in the Ant Queen level, remember? Mob waves? Come our way, only adding to the burden of just wanting to move on from this flying monstrosity. It's not often I play a level in the series where I mutter to myself, glad it's over with, but the Ghost Ship is sadly one of them. In spite of a cool theme, music track, and skybox that collide smoothly with the overall level layout, it is one of my least favorites, and I wish Dan had the foresight to abandon ship as soon as he landed. 54. The Entrance Hall. Now for one of the most easily forgotten levels, which is sad given what little we're given here is actually of interest. The layout of Xerox's study alone is intriguing and well punctuated with texts that comically outline his history, goals, and odd fascinations like learning card tricks. But there's really nothing more than this. You enter the level with imps guarding the pathways, which I think could have at least been replaced with another enemy type, at least a variation, but there we are. There's an exit to the left, and the study to the right. Not much more to see here, and it just begs to have another section or two, not only for the purpose of providing more space to explore, but also to make more of Xerox's mind while we're here. That is clearly the central purpose of the level being apparent as we reach this mountaintop. You're here, finally! This is the first stop before making your way to the antagonist, and we have an opportunity here to settle into the villain's habitat before moving forward. The opportunity is unfortunately underbaked, and I imagine it was a time constraint on the part of the devs to make this level so short between two major levels, just as Gallows Gauntlet did prior. At least the following level is there to imbue you again with the treatment of a stage more fleshed out. And let's be perfectly honest, we're going to forget the entrance hall exists again within a minute or two of this part of the video. So let's move on. 53. The Time Machine, the Ripper. Well folks, we have our first in the foray of MediEvil 2's roster, and it is perhaps unsurprisingly another boss battle. What do we have here with the Ripper? It's the third and final product of the time traversal with the Professor's machine that's landed us here, back in Whitechapel, just before Kia perishes under a pervert's advances. Seriously, even in 32-bit visuals, he is still a disturbing sight. So, how's the fight here? Well, it possesses a unique aspect in which Kia is basically a helpless damsel with her own helpless damsel health bar. You evade dashes and quick slices from his blood-branded blades by dashing yourself. The Ripper's wall vaults are an interesting change, panning the camera away from the alley as a viewpoint of said wall vaults, which is a welcome test of your timing. As with other fights in the series, there is only one point where he's left open to your attacks, and that's when he attempts to absorb Kia's vitality. It's a battle of speed, and the margin can be tight given how quickly Jack can whittle her health down, so we're forced to be attentive in when he approaches her, lest we lose time against the Ripper's efforts to kill Kia again. We've heard the boss music before, and while it's okay here, this would have been an excellent chance for something freshly grim given the setting of this retributive situation. The blood marks on the wall only add to the context of engaging a blood-drunk monster, so an OST that had the newness of a revenge tale come full circle would have elevated this level for me. Literally, I'd put it higher just for that reason, as the arena is visually spectacular amidst the speed of a malevolent foe whose aim is to end both you and your beloved. It's both a level and boss that feel missing in their potential, despite what it does well. Add it to the list. 52. Dan's Crypt from Resurrection. I'm so glad the devs knew the importance of Dan's awakening taking place within the same context of a tomb. It's the Fortesque we know, and how we imagine the series fashioning the first steps of our adventure. As for his new sidekick, well, I probably dissent a little from some fellow fans, but I'd rather Dan woke up with an empty head. Sorry, buddy. The crypt here is with no doubt an improvement of the original. You have access to various tutorial indexes on tombstands as the first game, but also some mechanic to function alongside some of these texts. There are battle dummies, for instance, to test out some of the attack patterns described, a bestiary of adversaries, a weapon type index, and even Dan's own personal journal. Very nice touch. And they remedied a past complaint I made about the original crypt, which was adding an associated secret with the canal. You cannot access the path until you gain the armor from Dragon Island, but will be rewarded with a rather poultry weapon. The design here overall is what it needs to be. It's a tutorial section that allows you to learn as much as you desire before venturing off to the graveyard, but is able to provide more should you be curious as to the contents of Dan's starting point. I don't dislike this level, and I'm glad the developers took liberties in making the crypt what it is in Resurrection. It is merely by its nature as a stepping off segment that keeps it this low on the list. Unfair perhaps, I know, but as with the original, it is the graveyard that truly introduces us to Gallowmere. 51. Inside the Asylum from Resurrection. Fans will either remember the Asylum fondly as a gauntlet in which they may use their constructed arsenal with satisfaction upon swarms of enemies, or as a trudge through monotonous encounters to claim their chalice and items before gladly moving on. This is no different with the Asylum in the PSP title, though as you can see given this is the first of the two titles mentioned, it is considered the lesser of both in this list. Level by level, you descend into the madness of this facility, with increasing chaos the further you progress. This section of the game truly is the hack and slash notion of MediEvil dialed up to 11, where the focus is almost entirely magnified on combat. Waves of zombies change slightly by floor as an attempt to retain a sort of freshness of the player's experience. The problem for me is that this version of the Asylum didn't do enough to reimagine what is a rather average experience from its inception. Perhaps I'm being too harsh, but there's nothing present which excels beyond the PS1 Asylum, and it was a level in need of some major changes. I will grant, of course, the commendation to one notable exception, and that's the final boss they've added, the Mad Axeman, or Mr. Axie. Sweet Kubrick reference, man. The fight is relatively bland, though not quite as annoying as the others we've encountered so far. There are more openings to attack him with, and a second phase where you lure him towards the pillars situated around you. The lack of difficulty and nuance is a major setback here, and it doesn't help that the camera controls don't support the need to pursue given spaces when running from his attacks. If you really don't like this fight, then there's some bad news. Should you wish to claim the chalice here, you will need to wait until claiming the dragon armor from Dragon Island. You know, that level I did nothing but laud with praises earlier, and then replay this whole level once more, including a repeat brawl with Mr. Axie. I suppose if we were looking at this without a completionist mindset, it could be ranked higher, but nah, you know what, this just isn't a great level, I'm sorry my friends. 51 is where I dub thee, Resurrection's Asylum. Delicious caffeinated nectar. You know, I've been trying to cut back for a while on this.
giving yeast inoculation for years, and it's very difficult for someone who's a rioting coffee addict such as myself. Seriously, we're talking like a pot or two of coffee a day at least. I can barely sleep. Well, my friends, I'm proud to announce to you that, as of today, I'm down to exactly 1 pot of coffee a day. I'm also proud to announce that we've gotten through the first 10 levels on this list. Yay! Okay, we still have some weaker regions to analyze first before we get to the peak content that this most wonderful series has to offer. We've a ways to go yet, granted, but we're getting there slowly. And we will get there, trust me. So, shall we continue? Let's see what's sitting at number 50.
Number 50. Zarok's Lair from MediEvil. The Showdown. We are here after smacking countless undead across Gallowmere's corrupted grounds thanks to Zarok's ego, and we finally get to confront the crazed old fool in the final chamber of his lair. I like the idea of him warming things up with a battalion set to overwhelm you, countered by the power of the chalice, which in turn summons your own little army. I've no doubt most of us were completely thrown off with the notion that we somehow needed to keep our soldiers alive without engaging combat as Dan. I think when I first tackled this challenge, it took a few deaths to finally figure out that this was a test of awareness, followed by an act of concentration. The weapon you need is hidden in a casket, and then used to sacrifice your own health for the sustenance of your legion. You know, hero stuff. A life vial drops for every troop you keep alive, which you'll need. Lord Caradoc is next, and this is where I'm not so sure if the climactic point of the final clashes are being met with what one would expect of a proper finale. It just feels like a warm-up. Not bad, but nothing more. And then Zarok, who ruffles behind the scenes while clumsily picking out the wrong spell before his transformation. Like the previous fight, I'm just not sure how to feel. It's evidently a step up in difficulty and pressure, but it lacks variation in having to address the strengths of your main adversary. This is it, my friends. After we're done here, the credits roll. So it's only fair in my view to expect the blaze of glory a final boss should provide. It certainly feels like a boss fight, just not the one we'd hope for to wrap things up in the main game. But brownie points for the unwitting attempt to cause destruction, beginning with himself. It's moments like this I give an ephemeral high five to the devs. Wholesome humor. And at 49, we have Gallows Gauntlet. My apologies, but this level more than most feels like a filler, adding between levels that are clearly much more developed and enjoyable. It is interestingly one of the only levels in the series that boasts another exit in case you're missing a key item, allowing you to leave and explore Gallowmere further until you're ready to proceed. Kinda cool, eh? Well, after spending a couple minutes here, you might be tempted to take an early exit. That said, the minions here have cool designs, with a gothic sense of direction which defines the series, but also experimenting with the margins of death and undeath. They're challenging as well if you're not careful, allowing you to try different methods out, such as, perhaps your newly acquired dragon armor. The serpent that chases you midway through does add a thrill, and will keep you dashing until you reach the dim green speckles of Zarok's magic. But the speed is near impossible to counter, and avoiding its movements which ricochet off your corrections almost feels cheap, as you attempt to gather key items, the chalice, and other goodies. But what truly keeps this level from going much higher is its lack of scale. The entire gauntlet doesn't feel like it's even meant to be explored, but is rather a basic pathway to roam forward on, hitting a few switches while avoiding the serpent mentioned, and then you're out. I'm able to clear this level in just a few minutes, and first-timers shouldn't have an issue beating it in under 10 if they're keen to get through it. Easily one of the more unfortunate levels in the game, as fans could only imagine what could be brought out further in a fiery gauntlet. Number 48. The Lake. My fellow Canucks know that when someone mentions they're heading to the lake for the weekend, there's an immediate sense of kindred awe and respite. The lake is meant to be a retreat from the business of metropolitan life, or even just everyday life itself, where one may slow down their egocentric pursuits, sorry but we all have those, and regain an essence of their humanity through what may be described as relinking to the sublime in nature, free of the urban bonds that distract us from noticing the natural movements of an ecosystem we are inescapably connected to, a portion of its beauty ever more reminding us that our constructs cannot compete with its state
of unfiltered being. That is what carries in my mind when I'm told about the lake. Now this is not what I consider and is an episode of mixed dread every time I replay. It's one of a bunch in MediEvil oozing with potential that couldn't quite construct itself in ways that would have better brought out its themes and intentions. In terms of trepidation and worry from falling, it shares much of the danger with pools of the ancient dead. The leaping aquatic monsters are a nuisance that need to be taken care of with good timing, and the monsters inhabiting this old town are a step up in difficulty, able to absorb a lot of damage and can guard many of your attacks. What's even more bothersome is that the level can bug out by not revealing these monsters again after knocking them off the plane you're above, and can thus prevent you from acquiring the chalice. The mood here is uneventful, and a new music piece would have worked wonders on bringing this town alive. The boardwalks themselves are drab and uninspired, but both the whirlpool and townside sections of the lake provide a glimpse of life that once flourished here, hints of a civilization that our hero must witness against the evil that now quiet its once purposeful existence. I can think of at least 2 levels in the game that executed exactly this with remarkable substance. Freezing the whirlpool with ruins is nice, and it always feels surreal to be beneath the waters, watching strange creatures move along within the lake as though they're just minding their own. It's overall a great setting underutilized against annoying foes and pathways. I wonder if we'll see another level on this list that improves on some of these issues. I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Number 47, The Enchanted Forest from Resurrection. This one's difficult. Some cool changes have been made here, like an actual boardwalk in the treetops above, where the colors and lighting change between both sections, and a generously expanded scale increasing capacity for exploration. The art direction is also undeniably well captured within the almost Celtic fantasy environment of near-iridescent mushrooms littered within the soils among mighty trees, and a skybox that exudes both sorrow and impending misfortune. There's honestly a lot to do here, and it wouldn't surprise me if some of you watching totally disagreed with this placement given what's presented within a mid-2000s game on a portable gaming system. But I stand by it, given what a slog this level feels like to play. The tree stump gimmick, for instance, is annoying, making various grumpy stumps follow you to where you'd like a boost to some cliffside. They're slow, distantly placed, and ultimately unnecessary in failing to add any positive value. As is the fungus challenge when chasing the fairies, which to me is nothing more than a poor man's ape escape. I love what they were going for here, don't get me wrong. Pulling the fairy search trial from the ant caves, relieving us of the ordeal, and spinning the challenge into both hide and seek with an element of chase. I just couldn't enjoy it, both for the backtracking components of a level that is unenjoyable to navigate, and the lack of challenge that accompanies the search. The puzzle underground, however, was a positive change, albeit a small one, and the Indiana Jones reference was so good and hearty. I always appreciate little additions like this. Oh, and the demons. Yeah, they suck. I don't like them. Enough said there. The morose soundtrack from Haunted Ruins is well placed here, but not so as the original track from the OG Enchanted Forest. This level is a good example of debating between quality and quantity, where I think the latter outperforms the former. The Enchanted Forest in this version possesses a high volume of activities to pursue and make use of while here, but none of them I found compelling. If you were happy with the gimmicks used here, this is probably much higher on your own list given how much you're able to engage with. Bully for you, friend. My mere opinion here rests on this region being literally bogged with its environment and is easily the lesser of the 2 versions of Enchanted Forest. 46. Haunted Ruins from Resurrection. A downgrade from our beloved Haunted Ruins, but not by a tragic amount. I appreciated a few things they were trying to do here in order to stand this one out, notably the volcanic elements bubbling below the castle as you hop forward to reclaim the crown, not to mention the chalice being well hidden below if you thought to put your armor on while venturing among more obscure spaces. They kept just about everything else the same though, which in this case I wish hadn't been so. I think they could have been more daring with the design, but rather stuck with the same idea of running along the crenellations of a haunted castle ground, dodging cannons which somehow never run out of ammunition, and another time sequence after you set off the volcanic crater. It honestly could have used just one more surprise to give fans a new challenge to enjoy, but it's mostly more of the same. The demons we deal with here, as with Enchanted Forest we just looked at, are no less obtuse than before and a pain to take care of.
If it's your first time ever running through this, it may hit home in a couple of ways, but to fans, I don't think there's any comparison between this and where it came from in 98. Before continuing to 45, you may have noticed a pattern taking form as this list has progressed, namely in how Resurrection and the original PS1 title compare in their level creations. This has been both a joy and insightful exercise for me as I put this video together, since it forces a fan such as myself to consider how various strengths measure between both games. I have to say, I've come across some surprises as I attempt to be honest in my assessments, and while I've no doubt been harder on Resurrection so far, you are going to see some cases later where I think Resurrection actually does surpass MediEvil in quality. Stay tuned. On that note, both of these games may take a little reprieve now, as MediEvil 2 will be kicking off the next few levels back to back after a nice break of its own. Let's see what's first from the sequel title. 45. It's Dankenstein, the first of what is essentially a two-part saga involving a fight prep followed by the fight itself. A quirky twist has been thrown our way after the lovely and totally peaceful Kew Gardens. Bodily limbs must be retrieved to take on a robotic companion of Palethorn, and in a timely fashion. The hub world being the professor's lab opens up this once, and you're tasked with gathering the stolen limbs one by one. As you grab a part, you have seconds to return it to the professor's station in order to build up the vessel against Palethorn's mechanical buddy. You are after 2 legs, 2 arms, a torso, and... Okay, that's awesome. It's not a very complex layout, and that's likely for the best given the pressure you're under, though still sharing a couple secrets for the daring explorer under said time constraints. Really though, you have loads of time to capture the 6 limbs in the time allotted before completing the level. The chalice is hidden atop the professor's bureau and can be grabbed after some creative movements alongside the cart tracks. I don't dislike this level, it bears a refreshing purpose of fetching items in a manner that doesn't overbear in any way to me, and I like this sort of change of pace. My ultimate complaint is that it just feels so much like a bonus level, as opposed to something with more meat on it like we are to see as the list proceeds. It's not a part of the game I dread, but I also don't get the feels going into it either. And for 44, in the blue corner it was Dankenstein, in the red corner it is the Iron Slugger. Yes, it's perhaps a little cheesy to put these two levels next to one another, but I honestly think they're interchangeable in terms of what they provide for the player. You could swap both of these and it would make no difference to me, as I receive about the same amount of pleasure from both of these connected episodes. After our Dankenstein hunt, we're taking on the Slugger in what is a run-of-the-mill boxing match not far off from other games of the time. The twist here is that your limbs will gradually fly off as your opponent gets a few good hits in, which makes you adapt to changing circumstances within each round. In between those rounds, you have half a minute to grab up 2 limbs from imps taunting you from outside the ring. Interestingly, losing specific limbs impedes your ability to perform specific movements in the fight. Legs lower your mobility, and losing your arms forces you to literally skull bash him. Regaining certain limbs has the inverse effect, helping you to retrieve certain abilities again within the fight. It's an idea I applaud the devs for, and is a quintessential case of thinking outside the box. It's charming too when looking at Palethorn dancing to the fight, though questionably close to his nemesis in such a small space. Weird. It would have been cool to have visible stands of the crowd, and maybe to have another way to interact with them as we pick up our lost limbs. But that said, this, like the previous level, Dankenstein, is really a bonus activity of sorts, a fun segue to a little distraction before casting back to the adventure at hand. Number 43, The Time Machine, Sewers. We will get to the actual sewers later, so it's no secret as you see that the return here is not an improvement on the first level. You're here for the time stone located in one of the huts, which triggers the animosity of the villagers here. Dan on a hand saves the day with an easy puzzle, and you now need to convince the Mullocks here that you resemble their leader. Grab it, use it, and off you go back to Whitechapel. Like its other time machine counterpart, it's lackluster in the content provided, despite the content itself not being that poor. The sewers back in time are an inversion of what you traversed before, so it is an interesting flip of your previous experience here, even though that was technically in the future. Funny how time works. There's no chalice or major reward here either, as with the preceding time machine level,
And the only noteworthy portion to me is going into the leader's hut, which hilariously possesses a massive facial icon of Dan inside. I mean, come on, what's not to love? Otherwise, it strips almost bare what made this level strong, though it's fair not to be harsh on this given it's meant to be a quick experience of changing what we recently witnessed before moving forward to the revenge encounter with the Ripper. I can't help but wish for more here, or a couple of secrets to uncover, but whatever. Let's go save Kia, I suppose. Number 42, the Demon. And here we are, the final affair against Palethorn, who is somehow able to effortlessly take the spell page we just worked so damn hard to retrieve. Like a good boss, he sends his lackeys Mander and Dogman after you one final time for a redemptive encounter. But they're just a lackluster repeat of what we experienced prior, only this time we end them for good. After that, well, I'll begin by saying I hope you are loaded with Gatling gun rounds and health, because the final section of this fight is a test of your timing and nerves. The demon is straightforward enough to analyze, noticing where his fist is aimed and then timing a dash to the spot he just slammed. His only other attack is a kind of flame cough which you're simply meant to hop over. Great! But then Palethorn's hovercraft appears to shower us with bombs and misery, and is your only opportunity to progress the fight by damaging his ship. There are two problems with this fight. One is how inconsistently difficult it is to dodge the bomb weaponry he casts your way, as it both immensely depletes the time you're allowed to focus any damage on him, and can stunlock you with one barrage after another, which can even catch you under a demon slam, all of which is easy to fall victim and will cost you a life bottle for sure. Second is that you're restricted to the use of ranged weapons. Your swords and melee options are rendered null here, meaning you better have stocked up a lot on your inventory. Even if you did, it may not be enough to come out on top after many, many tries. These two reasons ultimately point to what is a crucial problem with this fight. That is, if you're not prepared enough, you are screwed. Yes, you will need to leave and farm for gold and resources in previous levels to have a good chance against this duo if you're getting dominated. There's no shame in it either. This is easily the hardest fight you'll come across and is meant to be maddening. It just expects a bit much from you. Honestly, just put everything to your Gatling gun if you've acquired the chalices needed, and you should be okay so long as you have a healthy amount of life bottles filled. Furthermore, you will not have to redo the cathedral section and can return straight to the demon once you're ready. If this was not the case, we'd be looking at this level within the bottom 5 of MediEvil, so that is a major redeeming feature to me in addition to the strong presentation of the fight itself. But the way it restricts your weapon usage and the strange hitboxes from projectiles hold this fight back from reaching the heights of its boss fight brethren. Number 41, Inside the Asylum, from the original game. I don't have as much to say for this level unfortunately, as it shares the forgettable nature of its content along with Gallows Gauntlet and the entrance hall, and we've already taken a look at its operations in the Resurrection title earlier. If you disagree, no problem, as I can concede to the central function of the asylum, which acts as a brawling ground for you and your tools of destruction up to this point. That can be an absolute blast for some, a rest of sorts, where you can choose and swap between your favorite weapons and let loose on the maniacal crews that attempt to swarm you within this gauntlet. Sometimes you just need to hit stuff, an arcade-style set piece in which you may enjoy the fruits of your labor and watch with glee as enemies flatten and fall under your well-earned inventory. You descend level by level, which increases in variation with cannons firing on you, the arena becoming circular with additional entrances, and a two-side atrium with a lava canal of death between both sections. Inside the Asylum simply does not move me, and has never been a section I've looked forward to given how creative its surrounding regions have been up to this point. The two levels preceding this section, for instance, both outclass it in imaginative design, so it doesn't help that our attempt to rescue the mayor is done within the confines of reduced quality in every respect. That said, it isn't fair to judge the Asylum without returning to its essential intent, which was to allow the player a series of combat-focused encounters, free of puzzle-driven mechanisms and explorative navigation. For what it does concentrate on, it can be said to pass the test, but I think we'd all been hoping for something wackier and more robust within the setting of a madman-inhabited facility. And moving past the bottom 20 into the pools of the ancient dead from MediEvil at number 40. We've returned to a battleground whose chief ruler is the sinking swamp that dreams of swallowing anything above its endless muck hole.
That unfortunately includes our Fortesque. So what's good here? The atmosphere covering this quagmire of woes is excellently construed within the context given. Battlefield from a century past with the restless dead wandering amidst the former plains of inglorious combat, all captured within the Bob and Barn soundtrack to near perfection. The timpanis tap to foster the old sense of vanity in battle, along with the ominous chants ringing of death and despair alongside the bubbling hunger of the unfathomably thick lake right beneath your toes. I cannot ever tire of this aura within the pools here. I also like the mini collectathon that happens here, gathering the helmets that you need in order to proceed to the next level, being the lake, and a daring section if you peel your eyes to a certain angle to see another life bottle and some goodies over here. A welcome change, in my view, is the armored knights, which can only be overpowered with physics. You need to move them off their paths and into the swamp which the level is trying to accomplish against Dan. I like it. We're fighting fire with fire. And it's so satisfying to watch one of these baddies sink with their souls levitating upwards from the goo they cannot escape. But I would be doing a disservice to everyone if I didn't mention the frustrating design choices for the overall landscape you're meant to pass through. Portions of these paths feel a little too disconnected, resulting in many cheap deaths, compounded by the flawed control scheme that limits your movements among the more nuanced sections. The pools were obviously designed to be a challenge to your handling of Dan among the strictly narrow avenues, but it would have been both generous and a good design choice to create a shortcut here and there as you progress, as a reward for your efforts. There's also a cart section which adds a short thrill, especially the first time, followed by a slog encounter which is a nuisance to push through. If you don't have the hammer here, good luck. The only other complaint I have is it feels as though a little more should be here, like another fort alongside one of the landmasses here that you could have pursued for a rune or something of the sort. We will see how this was handled later as an improvement, but Pools of the Ancient Dead remains just an okay level that's held aloft due to its audio and visual spectacle. 39 is the Ghost Ship from Resurrection. I don't mind this level. I'm rather astounded in fact at how well this ship was realized against the original. They must have known the deep vexations of fans well prior to development. I'm biased against the Ghost Ship though, and the bar is not exactly high for another contender to hop over, but Resurrection's attempt at revisiting paid off really well given it's almost 20 spots above its PS1 counterpart. Perhaps we'll start with the issues on the level first, and then tell of the redeeming features to make us feel better. Let's try that. If you remember the final complaint of the last overview, we're going to start with that here, being the boss fight that you're compelled to endure. In fact, it's longer than the original fight given his health bar has been pumped up and with more precise timing required when lighting the cannons. You'll get the hang of it, but it will take you some time to get used to. And as if it wasn't bad the first time, pyro mobs come to make your life worse intermittently once again, slowing your progress, which is further hampered by having to relight your club after short sequences and then switching between various weapons to quell the darn skellies showing up. If Cambridge had been more creative with this part by creating a different challenge here, or even just doing something like adding another powder keg to launch you to your next destination, we'd be singing more praises here. What a shame. But the Ghost Ship on PSP is actually a well-rounded venture otherwise. The platforming which takes a front seat, as the original did, is crafted with greater care, able to both borrow the layout from the earlier title and adding its own design choices, and for the better. I cannot leave this level without mentioning the darn cannon lid ordeal being scrapped and replaced with a path towards a doorway. That brings us to another great strength which overtakes where this level comes from. We spend more time on the interior, inside, and the connectivity here is sincerely fun and atmospheric to run through. This includes a notable shortcut allowing you to retreat in case you're missing a barrel or need to head back to the cannon. Outside, inside, I enjoy myself so much more here. Notice also the sky that joins you among your hops and dashes, an endless series of wisping clouds and dimly tarred land masses below. This was one of the few things I think Ghost Ship did well before, so there was no need to change it, but I'm glad the devs decided on the environment tone shift, as it does what I think Resurrection levels should be doing in contrast to the original, and that is daring to reimagine itself without tarnishing the foundations of the level it references. Let's not forget the officers here, which is another complaint from the first game, which now allows us to yield souls from the pirate crew and a little more time to defeat the officer in charge before they reanimate. It's not a radical change, but it feels less punishing than before. It's all brought together with another fetch function, 7 powder kegs hidden throughout the ship, which will launch you out of... Why in the world is this at the back of the ship? Oh well. Despite how much I'm lauding this level, it's nowhere near the top of the pile for this series to probably any fan, including myself. But it's not a level I groan upon entrance like a certain other ship we know about. The bar was low, yes, but even then it can be tripped over, and Ghost Ship in Resurrection most certainly leaps over with commendable gusto instead. Number 38 is Cemetery Hill from Resurrection. Another solid reimagining, but this time still a lesser version of where it comes from. As soon as you move forward, the design focus comes into play, with a greater emphasis on the central hill than the original. Yes, I know, the hill is the anchor and key gimmick of both versions, but the surrounding area is crucial as well, with the original being more colorful and playfully morose, whereas the Resurrection version yields itself rather as a follow-up to the graveyard with colors lacking brightness and louder visuals, rather dulled, but not necessarily in a bad way. It really just feels like we're inescapably next to cliff sides and forest barriers, to endless rock and pine trees, whereas I remember fondly being by a hill that excites the player with their impending steps towards the mausoleum, curiously flexed above its surroundings. More on that later. That said, this level contains the familiar spirit of furthering your exploration habits, navigating around trees, through sheds, and even making use of your shovel for players that notice the semi-conspicuous grave with soil that beckons to have its contents revealed. The shovel mechanic is also not a one-off, which I appreciate, something that we will use from time to time throughout our adventure. The level is okay, but I'm stumped to consider what it really does to elevate on the original. The darker and muskier visuals are a welcome change, that's fine, and what it does here is serviceable for player engagement, but it is not daring enough otherwise, failing to go beyond. 37. The Time Machine from MediEvil 2. Which, to be clear, is the first episode of your time travel with Dan. Back to the museum again, though only for a short while. Combat is not as focused this time around, and you're rather challenged with a few puzzles in order to gather the time machine pieces for the professor to help you rescue Kia. It's what I think was lacking in the sewers part, which immediately follows here, as it deeply restricted your freedom to advance, whereas you have challenge to pursue here at your own leisure. The fantastically intoxicating OST returns to serenade us as we check each room for their respective pieces. One of them is hidden in a sort of planetarium, where you'll briefly platform in finger form. It's very easy, especially if you're not me. Another in baiting aliens to shoot the spacecraft within, allowing you to reach it. And Memory Room, that's at least what I call it, where you must step onto stone pads in the order provided to you. Using a national piece of music to bring down an alien is a stroke of genius, compounded by the nearby text adding to the humor. It's a welcome bit on nationalistic pride of an empire now gone, which I commend the developers for having added in a game setting when said empire was around its peak in imperialism. Moreover, it's just a reminder that there is more attention to detail within the levels of MediEvil than I think most people give credit for, usually a joke of some sort for which there is no shortage of in these games. All that said, you are, as mentioned, not here for long, and without even a chalice to collect until you reach the final episode. Its purpose, after all, is one of a couple pit stops before we reach Jack the Ripper, so what brevity of content there is here is still enjoyable. 36. The Pools of the Ancient Dead in Resurrection. Slightly edging out its competition, the pools return with what is a very interesting attempt to recreate the swamp level we know and love. Okay, I guess just the swamp level we know. The space here is more generous, with fall depths still very feasible, though not so much to the effect of developers trying to be nasty to the player, notably with a more fulsome environment to enjoy. You're surrounded by dead trees erected along your winding paths with withering vines stretching across the background, helping to accentuate a kind of medieval fantasy context you'd see in King's Quest or The Witcher, not to mention pockets of air lightly paced around the perimeter, yielding our senses to the fact that we are in the bog, far from what we know as the civilization of Gallowmere. Knocking over armored units makes its return as well, and is no less satisfying than the first. Am I honestly the only one who enjoys watching them drown so? Maybe I need help. It becomes apparent that ambition is present here, with not only more space but an actual fortress for Dan to invade and then rummage through among the fortifications of this grand setup, which gloriously overlooks the swamp as you run along the crenellations above the mired contents of this dreary landscape, which is all to say that this level is pure eye candy when you take a moment to soak it in. The OST here is
kind of suitable. It's a good track, all things considered, from our boys B&B, but fails to situate itself within the tone it's trying to characterize in the pools through the audio's mismatched mood. The first game wins hands down in that regard. There's also the Ballista minigame, which is just there, literally tacked on with nothing of value added. This minigame aside, there's nothing here that's done poorly, and I'm clearly in the camp that this is the greater of both Ancient Dead regions. The problem with the level is the same as the original, in that it wasn't the best of ideas in how it was carried out to begin with. You're basically scurrying around while knocking others aside while in pursuit of lost souls, or in this case, mechanical parts, which unfortunately doesn't transcend from there. It's generic and therefore fairly forgettable as with the title we first tried, but kudos to the endeavor made here. Number 35 is Return to the Graveyard in MediEvil. We are back to where things got started after a tussle with the stained glass demon, a level classic in so many rights, and is the final frontier before we begin our adventure abroad to Greater Gallowmere. If you are a daring adventurer and notice that the coffin floating along the stream may happen to be buoyant enough to carry you somewhere, you'll be well rewarded with treasure and even a form of congratulations in the form of text, further encouraging you to continue exercising this mindset as you travel onwards. This is still one of my favorite secrets from the PS1 era, not just in MediEvil, and I remember with fondness the first time as a kid taking the leap of faith and being treated to such a well-hidden section for the risk. It's a lovely memory for me. The vibes of your return to the graveyard have elevated in terms of undead hostility, being chased and pursued by the restless dead and deprecated. Wildlife takes its place here as well, following the key used that you obtained on the hill. It's great and is a sign of both the boss fight beyond the gates and of the variety in enemies you'll encounter after you leave. You're being primed for what's around the corner and adds with success to the atmosphere at play. You then encounter what is a bittersweet section of the level. The space usage is thoughtful, a little hill to welcome you and picking up a rune among more gravestones and wolves prowling the grounds. Descending beneath through tunnels is where the pleasure this level brings begins to subside. The surprise attacks are fine, but then we have to engage a dull and slow activity in pushing blocks off cliffs to create a path for the exit. I've never liked it, and it's a compliment to Return to the Graveyard, because it flows so well up to this point before arrested development sets in and puts a pause on the ride. It's too bad. We end with an uneventful boss, or bosses, encounter which delivers visually but fails in execution. If you have your hammer wound up or even a club ready, this is a cakewalk after figuring out their attack patterns, which is a kind of phantom dash followed by a leap they're vulnerable to. The finish is nice with a new ability and then a bon voyage chat with a gargoyle before being set free to the wider world of Gallowmere. Return to the Graveyard is an instance in MediEvil where the initial design is very strong, but is then sadly disrupted with pushing rocks and whacking wolves, neither of which I find satisfying. But as with both this list and the exit following our gargoyle friend, it only gets better from here. Number 34, Cathedral Spires, The Descent. Oh boy, I am shuddering in my very seat as I utter those words. If you know, you know. The level is crazy hard. The descent follows directly after you reach the top of the cathedral spires, literally descending after having ascended around oil spills and demonic spittle. If you thought the spires were tricky, which they are, the worst is yet to come. 8 more spirits are in need of rescue here, and they are guarded by many creatures from the realms of chaos. Even worse, some are guarded by a finicky chandelier and wooden platforms. Nice! If you thought the ghost ship was frustrating, the descent raises the stakes even further given that it's even more challenging and that it's split between 2 other levels. You're in the thick of it and are required to reach these spirits at the cost of your mental health. Notice the camera betraying you as you've no choice but to peer back to the chandelier in order to get back across. That's right, my friend. Even the camera is trying to ruin your life. As with the previous cathedral section, there are a few health fountains to be had here in addition to only a little loot if you need to recharge your super armor. Many spirits will provoke demons to awaken while locking the doors on you. Well, isn't that nice? Forcing an often unfair engagement your way unless you're loaded with ammunition. These fights are not optional, so you're mandated to use your ammo, weapons, and shields before progressing. Did I mention this area is difficult? An interesting puzzle is situated here, which gives Dan one final hurrah in his headspace, letting you claim a cog within the machinery. This part here where you're flung from one side to the exit must have been the developers thinking they'd show a morsel of mercy to the player. Bless their hearts. The rotating rooms you're meant to connect is also cool, though in subsequent playthroughs makes me wish they'd have gone a bit further with the complexity, but it's good enough. And finally, if you weren't broken enough, you have a minute to escape through the fastest route possible, meaning going back to the godforsaken chandelier and up within a minute's time. You are graciously given the opportunity to try again instead of ending the game should you fail, along with a sequence of rooms to direct your way back. But even with this assistance, you will be pushed to your mind's limits in the descent, which is a pun I'm sure that was never lost on the game designers as they were putting together this ego-bruising platform monstrosity of a second part level. Now I hear you, dear viewer, across space and time, wondering, Ernest, why is this level ranked so high to you? Because I'm a sadist. Sort of. This is the stuff of Demon Souls many years before people associated Miyazaki with punishing yet excellent levels and broken controllers. Everything I've described so far is thoughtfulness in action, deliberate in its capacity to challenge and push the player to limits well suited for a game's finale. Despite all my deaths, my slips, and my inability to adapt quickly enough with new encounters, the Spire's descent ceaselessly reminds me that this is the end, the Mount Doom of your adventure, and adversity is the last resort of forces against you before ending Palethorn's malevolent pursuits for good. But it is difficult. Very difficult. Remember, meditation is always there for you, a breath away. Unfortunately for this level, the number one spot is miles away as a result of its cheap death traps and design choices which mostly never feel fair here, even as a region at the tail end of the game. Good luck, comrade, and remember, it's just a game. You know what? Screw this level!
Number 33, the Graveyard from MediEvil. And here we are. Oh, the Graveyard. Across our quantum wavelengths, I can feel fans immediately struck with compelling nostalgia at the sight of gravestones littered among the gated fields, and Dan's simple yet swift swings against zombies with his early but trusty smallsword. Welcome to the Graveyard, my friends, the first true MediEvil experience so many of us cherish to this day. The Graveyard is a gentle invitation for you to Gallowmere, an opportunity to feel a slice of the world as Dan. This includes gathering runes, continuing to read some texts adding context to the area, and your first ever encounter with zombies. Oh, how I remember the sounds of impact they made in my first swings, knowing quickly that this was an action experience, and have not looked back since. What's also inviting is the color usage here, with a palette that expresses what you're in for. Various tones are saturated to create bold forms that pop out in a darkly iridescent manner, extending gothic artistry in what is some of the best dark fantasy visuals from 90s gaming in my opinion. This would be a great time to finally give a nod to Other Ocean Interactive and their work in the 2019 remake. Notice the colors being given the pop I mentioned, now more easily rendered with modern tech, and how wondrous the composed types and forms come together in their designs. Also, just look at this. What an excellent treat for fans returning as a wink to what you're pursuing, and to new players as just a generally engrossing detail amidst a fantastical preview of what's ahead. This is such an important part of MediEvil, and why its fans are so enamored by its world years later. Other Ocean Interactive, thanks man, you guys get it. MediEvil is also a game of gimmicks, and in the spirit of starting things off with grace, you're encountered with a stone angel that opens a path based on which way it's facing. New players will be able to figure it out in a few minutes and enjoy what the surrounding gates offer upon opening. Afterwards, there is a giant pit that you track through towards the exit, and that's it. It's a strong start to the game. But just because it's an intro level doesn't mean you couldn't have gone further. For instance, the early path before the wooded gate is linear and could have used a couple smaller hidden paths to investigate as you move forward in awe of the new and inviting environment. Perhaps I've played this level so much that I can't help but wonder how they could have included more content to floor first-time players. The Graveyard's greatest appeal is exposing the player to the art direction and basic mechanics of MediEvil, all within a mood that constructs a dark and gothic universe you may never want to leave. So while the Graveyard is not the strongest the series has to offer, it most certainly succeeds in thrusting you forward to a world of wonders. Number 32 is the bubbly and bouncy Pumpkin Gorge. I think this is one of the less surprising placements on this list, given that the Gorge is a mixed bag in terms of quality, and it doesn't help that it follows the remarkable shadow of another region which you're likely just coming from.
but it remarks in its presentation a decency in its contents and themes that correlate closely with how we identify MediEvil as a Halloween type of game. I've actually written this part of the script just before the Halloween weekend takes place, and Pumpkin Gorge, despite its setbacks, is still able to retrieve a solid identity within its winter squash populated paths. The music holds hands with the overall design here well, as though you're traversing a kind of fantasy funhouse, encountering surprises such as spontaneously erupting pumpkins and the rolling waves of thunderous orange-colored fruit as you attempt to gather what's needed in progressing. It's a fairly linear level, with notable exceptions in how it branches along various forks dissenting from the main path. This is refreshing, and it was what I was just remarking on with the graveyard, in how paths part ways to force the player in constructing a mental, cartographical understanding of the area they're attempting to make sense of. It aids in allowing the player to replay it sometime after, and attempt to rehearse and revise how they navigated it the first time, possibly playing around with the order in which they accomplished the challenges presented to them. It's just good design. The pumpkin plants are actually quite terrifying in their depictions, and would have been very well suited to a proper horror game, but the nature of this level renders them as just another adversary, thematic of its natural conditions that surround them. No problem. All of this helps to develop an understanding of this area's reality. Pumpkins turn monstrous against their better nature, and the cause rooted in the following level, which answers the reasons for the disorder you're currently witnessing and pressing through. It's a form of establishment in fiction that the developers solicitously conceived in connecting this part of Gallomir's world, where we have a sense in the surrounding architecture and geographical constitution of what once was a locality of life thriving, now rendered in pandemonium thanks to Zarok. We already saw this with levels like the lake and Resurrection's Welcome to the Sleeping Village, but it is executed here more excellently in my view, with even greater conceptions of the concept to come. Despite all this, there are two drawbacks that hold back the gorge for me. One is the platforming. This is definitely not on the level of Ghost Ship in respect to both significance and irritation, but its levitating mushrooms do not operate well given the control limitations, not to mention we need to backtrack using these, which further set irritation upon a gimmick that does not operate well here. That brings us to reason number 2. Backtracking to the level's entrance is necessary to retrieve the chalice, and you'll be doing so from the other end as a result of how the monsters are spaced out. You'll need to survive the giant toadstools again, even with a semi-shortcut available, but ultimately out of a pursuit that feels unnecessary as a product of poor placement. Our expectations were different during this era in the 90s, granted, but the level doesn't bring out anything that corresponds with having to return to the beginning as though it were a fulfilling pursuit to undertake, like another path opening as you close in on the chalice signifying the level, expecting you to make the effort. Perhaps I'm grasping at straws, I don't know. But I do know the Pumpkin Gorge is considered one of the quintessential middle-of-the-road levels in the series by fans, and I stand with the community on this one. Number 31, The Graveyard from Resurrection. Yep, that's right. I consider ever so slightly the opening set piece of Gallowmere in the PSP title to be the better one. It's likely a spicy take, and I'll own that I may be close to alone on this view, but I genuinely think this has the edge in overall quality. Let's examine these parts in parallel, shall we? The soundtrack to begin with is nice. Really, I'm not sure which one I like better. Resurrection weaves in a progressive cadence between a soft build of the chants and intermittent woodwinds into marvelous orchestral grandeur. It makes your adventure start here almost a little jovial, epic even. Yeah, I like it. There's much better from the B&B factory to come, but it captures the game's beginnings well enough. The Stone Angel mechanism, however, was in need of a major revision but remains as simple as the PS1 title. I know that PSP owners at the time might not have played any of Dan's games before, and the devs were trying to repeat a soft introduction to the game, but something more mind-bending would have been appreciated. I do like the Angel's design though, visage covered and helpless in preventing her ability to open where she points. A clever play on the Angel's gaze from the first game. The zombies have a less compelling entrance here as well, and the level's recreation does rework the player's means of traversal in making for the exit, though in a rather generic manner repeated from the graveyard in the first MediEvil. But there is one factor which I think solidifies its position ahead of the first graveyard, and it is the realization of the team's style and artistic direction. From start to finish, I feel within the world of a dark fantasy that grips me with immersive color combinations and landmark placements. I compared Cemetery Hill from Resurrection with the original before at number 38, by remarking on the differentiation in color brightness and variety being reduced, which was carried forward by the graveyard here, but not to a fault. That's what we have with this experience at hand, a visual mood being dulled in order to generate what is a spiritual extension of a Burton-esque world, which was an inspiration of the Cambridge team before MediEvil was even conceived. It's a bit difficult to describe, but what I enjoy here is being surrounded by deliberate placements of walls, gravesites, yards, and paths that exist in contrast to the natural surroundings of the entire graveyard. Trees in the distance that almost seem to slither upwards, with a mountainous backdrop and wispy nighttime sky that all helps to fabricate a gothic arrangement of parts that together make every step here an enchanting moment within this enclave of tombs. It is able to elevate various notes of design from the original, just as Pools of the Ancient Dead on Resurrection had done, with its atmospheric renditions more clearly expressed. Everywhere you look here is easy on the eyes, further heightened by a strong audio setup, and that is what carries this version ever so marginally over MediEvil's The Graveyard. But know that I hold both of them dearly as a fan. Where does the precious time go? We are already at the last 30 of this list, which means we are officially halfway through. Fantastic. Look, I even changed my outfit to get into the Halloween spirit after number 32's Pumpkin Gorge. I'm a Slavic personal trainer. Yeah, I think that's it. I kind of got a tracksuit going here. Look, I even have a little bit of smoke. Isn't that cool? It's actually not smoke, it's just from a diffuser here. Look. And it looks like a gourd, you know, something pumpkin themed. Eucalyptus. I'm really bad at Halloween. And you know what? That's okay, because I'm in good spirits regardless. We're in the last 30 now, and we are starting to get really close to the levels that I cannot stop gushing about from this series. We have a few that I have some issues with, and you're going to see a couple of them very shortly, but there's not a level left that I dislike. Every single level you will see in the next half is something I enjoy in some essential proportion, at the very least. And we're getting closer to the absolute best, the marvelous of MediEvil. So, let's continue our adventure together. I will see you again at the top 10. And continuing on at number 30 is the Sleeping Village from Resurrection. I feel bad for the devs that they were tasked with recreating one of the most established landmarks of the entire franchise, as tall an order as you could request of the team. But it turns out to be a solid effort. As with the original Sleeping Village, the PSP version places exploration front and center in the gameplay. Returning fans will quickly note how spacious the village's quarters are, both from a camera perspective, which pans more closely to Dan's figure, and at a lower angle, and with wider streets spread more generously, allowing you the sensation of greater liberties taken in your movements while meandering around town. You will also, as before, spend a good deal inside various structures, all to their own purposes, such as hopping between furniture over a flooded floor, which is a new addition to the village, and then some of the refinement for the other buildings, including the smithy, the church, the library, the house possessing the bust, and the mayor's manor. These all continue to bear a relationship in the level's design, challenging you to build an understanding of this village by gathering items, noting informative texts, and piecing how everything fits together within this town-sized puzzle. An appreciated, though not very enjoyable minigame they added was a dog hunting sequence called Duck Shoot. It's plain, and if anything, detracts from the process of enjoying the mysteries here, but appreciated in that they were trying to add purpose in opening an entry to the mayor's manor. Speaking of, I like what they added here. There's a walled section with both a fountain and a deliberate view of the river, allowing you to note where the chalice sits, which has been moved from the church in the original. Thumbs up, as it reinforces the player to continue marking other sections and how it might lead them to this most coveted item, a testament to the village's nature. If we stopped here, we'd be discussing this level at a much higher spot on this list, and we're only beginning the top half of the series at number 30. So why so low? Because the Sleeping Village in this version fails quite dramatically in a single area that fans so strongly associate with the original: the atmosphere. Resurrection Sleeping Village completely missteps in bringing out what is so indelibly marked within our minds of Dan's original moments here, and it is primarily in one aspect it does so, which is in the soundtrack. Let me just let it play for a bit in the background. I understand that the developers here might not have been able to repeat the audio that helps wrap the first experience so wonderfully, but why on earth was a time machine style track placed here? I've been charitable to musical pieces so far in this list, but this is a design travesty, as we know Bob and Barn are perfectly capable of writing something befitting of this area. They knocked it out of the park the first time after all. I don't want to guess what happened here, if it was a time constraint not to produce another song, some internal drama, lack of willingness, whatever it may be. I simply think this was a terrible insertion of OST for a level that is known for its transcendence and quality, undeniably shaped by its remarkable music. Let's now release from the track playing. Do you feel a stronger sense of the level's identity? Heck, does it even suit what I've described so far and what we know about the village's impact? I didn't think so. It's a shame because I can't really remark on the art direction much, given that it is brought to life in its depiction as a result of the sound we hear and feel as we gain insight of what's present. That is what I mean by atmosphere, as it's a concept that combines a range of crucial components that together harness a pervasive ambiance you're meant to feel in your experience, and that is what the Sleeping Village is all about. Everything is linked in the village, more so than the majority of the franchise's roster. And even if it never could have achieved the awe in design that the original accomplished, the poor choice of music ultimately reduces this level to something much less than what it could have been. Okay, let's try to be more positive on this one. 29. The Tyrannosaurus Rex. The first instance before encountering this reanimated prehistoric beast is a hint from Winston about looking for his weak point, which was never helpful given, that's basically how bosses work. Then the fight begins. Remember Dragon Island and Xerox Lair, the first two on our lovely list here? They might have done well to take note on how the Rex was constructed. As already mentioned several times, boss fights are a bit of a bane in this series as they often range on the side of generic and uninspired to a stark exception. Tyrannosaurus Rex is one such exception. The fight begins with you avoiding its attacks until it tires out to summon help, allowing you to go Shadow of the Colossus on him and climb up to attack the beacon fixed on his head. After doing this twice, he takes flight and you're forced to find new ground. Literally. Same concept as before, except you're dealing with a ranged opportunity to deal damage while also managing the summoned fossils again. It then dies, drops a life bottle, and Bob's your uncle. Speaking of, I think Bob and Barn elevated this fight to a scale it was meant to achieve. The music is almost damning in its tone, both epic and intrusive in mood, taking the struggle to new heights. I always feel the sense that I am trying to overcome something as a heroic archetype against some form of chaos when engaging the Rex here. The second phase is even better as it indicates a change in approach you have to adapt to, making use of another part of the level. It's not as though it broke new ground or anything as a level or boss battle, but damn it, it's such a solid fight in the series to me. It doesn't waste your time by requiring numerous attacks calculated for annoyingly patterned vulnerabilities, and thus has an almost octane-inhibited flow to it. Even a little detail added was that if you escaped to another room during the first phase, your surroundings would continue to be pummeled and shaken at the giant fossil's unrelenting destruction. They really thought this whole level out. It may be added that there could have been content attributed somehow to your fight here, but I think we get that by now with fight-focused regions, and that in this sense it cannot compete with most of the remaining entries. But it's both a well-ordained initial battle in spirit of action game spectacle, as well as a closing of your awakening from the museum. At least, for now. Number 28. Gallowmere Plains. I guess I lied at the beginning of this video, didn't I? Oops, sorry. There is actually one hub world that we're ranking today, and it is the circus-themed centerpiece of Gallowmere in Resurrection. It's the most relaxing of the regions you'll come to know on the PSP title, aside perhaps from Dan's own crypt, which is reminiscent of something like Dragon Shores from Spyro 2. It is also a region that does attempt to step up its volume and content with a generous extent of mini-games, a voodoo witch who's very questionably depicted that can tell Dan about other areas, and multiple exits at the plains entrance, which stays true to the interconnected nature of MediEvil's world. As with many of the ideas in Resurrection, the minigames don't control well by today's standards and would leave many frustrated by its unintuitive movement responses, but a couple of them aren't that bad. I think I just had an idea. Let's rank them! Alright, number 8 is Shepherd's Delight. Look, I love the Wallace and Gromit themed creatures, they're adorable, but guiding anything to another point within a time limit is a scourge to gaming. This has never been my idea of fun, and never will be. Practically bottom by default. Number 7, Guardian of the Bell. It's Bell Defense. Yes, that's it. Exactly as it sounds like. Rendered facile after you attain your best weapons, but not the worst idea. Still, doesn't ring like the rest.
6. Trebuchet Terror. Hucking boulders at moving and temporarily revealed targets. The challenge is becoming comfortable with the launch physics. Pretty tedious, will make you sweat with consternation, but doable. 5. Whack-a-Zarok. Commit to circular movements while waiting for Zarok heads to pop up and you should be okay. Also tedious, but not as bad as the Trebuchet. 4. Pit of Death. Think the Asylum levels, think Ratchet & Clank challenges. You're fending off baddies while staying away from the doom of a pitfall. They're demanding, but perhaps not as demanding as... Number 3. Weapon Master. Another Ratchet & Clank styled arena challenge, this instance restricted to a single weapon. It's both a fun challenge and training for any part of your arsenal you're unfamiliar with. 2. Arrow of Faith. Starts off straightforward in earlier challenges, but becomes a menacing minigame with later progression. I like it, feels as though you're putting in quarter after quarter in an arcade for good old target practice. And number 1 at the very top is Vermin Control. Not only do the hitboxes respond well to your smashes against the rats, but it's damn satisfying to observe the impact on each of these little guys. Remember, I'm a tad sadistic. Easily my favorite of the bunch, and possesses an accessible feature of pointing to remaining vermin to save you from eternal headache. Well done, Vermin Control. You win. And back to the level at hand. I'm tempted to put this higher simply for the ambitious level of input here, easily keeping someone busy for a few hours or so to completion. It's just far too padded out with gameplay that will almost certainly miss with the player who may allow their completionist mind to run riot into all difficulty levels for each game on offer in this festival. It's a carnival of delightful proportions that, in essence, gets the job done for what it set out to do. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna get another game of Vermin Control in.
Number 27. The Greenwich Naval Academy. The gravitas from the preceding observatory is a little lost here. A military base unfolds before you, armed with cannons and levels to ascend, where you meet the game's antagonist for the first time, face to face. As with other patterned level connections in the game, this one is less lengthy in space and content, but substantive in what it offers. Given the absence of a chalice, you are free to peruse the landscape without having to bother zombie slamming here at all, if you so choose. Inside is another story though, where an octometer, I think that's how you pronounce it, has a buffet of dead sailors next to switches you have to fiddle with in order to obtain the bellows strangely submerged in goop. It's a solid head puzzle in a time where navigating between different dimensions during the PS1 N64 era was well underway, so this mechanic is put to good use here, albeit with lessening relevance as the player repeats their experience. I wish there was more to the level than this, but unfortunately, you need only grab the bellows and place it in the balloon contraption up top, hopping away upon the new item, memories, in order to continue dashing the efforts of Lord Palethorn, voiced by a young Steven Blum at the time. You are left to deal with his associates in a mini-boss fight. It's a quick encounter, and I mean this in both directions. If you are not fast on your feet or properly kiting them, they will make quick work of you. But a few good hammer slams and some ammunition should put them to rest after a short while. Overall, what we have in this level is rather fine, robust in what little there is, but yearning it seems for a little more that could have made this academy a gem in the series.
Number 26. The Pumpkin Serpent. I'll say right at the outset that this level is disappointing, since the potential for something grander is so visible within a moment of your time here. Of course though, it doesn't condemn the level's overall quality given what it does well, and earns its spot at 26 for other reasons. It's a good boss level forcing you to complete the tried and true search and destroy mission style of hunting the pumpkin serpent's pods. The fight itself is easy to break. If you have an enchanted sword, you can hack away at the poor pumpkin for a few seconds and he's done, with a nice visual of flowers blooming upon defeat. If it isn't obvious enough, the quickness of the battle against what is a stunning creature born out of European fantasy and Halloween lore is an immersion depleter, robbing the player of any connection to a threat against what should be a very dangerous foe. Why does the series keep doing that? The other issue is the level size, which granted has gone beyond merely attributing this space to a boss battle without any additional purpose. The overall size could still have been more extensively realized given that there is a foundation of design here that intrinsically beckons the player's scrutiny around this farmstead's corners. I otherwise really enjoy the Pumpkin Serpent. Dark and deep vibes, dead fish, the undeniable presence of corruption and even despair, all together permeating the gothic universe that we signed up for in MediEvil. with still some spaces to take interest in as you familiarize yourself with the curious situation of a massive winter gourd and its pumping life force hidden throughout. The Pumpkin Witch is a charming touch, a sense of motherhood and love to the environment in which she and her veggie kids have fallen victim to Xerox magic, who also provides reason for return in case you did not use the talisman for the Dragon Gem, a feature of the franchise's nature rooted in adventure. The chalice is cleverly hidden here too, requiring notice of the well once covered prior to the fight, and then suddenly free of the rooted tentacles blocking Dan's ability to see what's beneath. This is all great, and I know the developers were capable of adding more with the same respect in design that they've already been able to cast together for the Pumpkin Showdown. A couple more winding paths around the main pad, another curtained area to uncover, and this could have been one of the strongest in the entire arsenal of boss levels, or dare I say, MediEvil levels. Number 25. Kensington, the Tomb. As with the Museum and Tyrannosaurus Rex, the Tomb is a transitory level based on your invitation to save here, a feature used throughout the game which is kind of the developers, given this was before creating save states and autosave. The lighting here is the first of what your senses might pick up on, bringing out the theme of an underground tomb rather well. Though I'm sure most of what's here is preserved, we're met by angry puppies again who don't care for your arrival. What ultimately ties this little level together, though, is the puzzle which is literally central to obtaining artifacts needed in order to rescue Dan's future waifu. I think it's well done. Not overly simplistic, though perhaps lacking another complementary problem-solving mechanic aside from just pushing boxes to reach certain heights, but it lacks the nature of repetition that we find in other brain-teasing gimmicks. It's just a shame that it wasn't a bit longer, as the theme is nailed here with both revisiting where you are awakened and the fact that the contents of the level itself are so well placed and enjoyable to explore. However, there's one more thing that I find wholesome to this day, beautiful even. It is the uncovering of Kia from her sarcophagus, who immediately falls forward into the arms of Dan in exhaustive awakening, then softly carried away without a word. It's endearing, free of dialogue yet an undeniable foreshadow of Dan's role to play with in her life back from centuries of sleep. Perhaps it's just me that feels this, but the final seconds of this level are still moving to me today, and exist as a rare occurrence of crucial story punctuation within a region's parting. Number 24. Scarecrow Fields from Resurrection. Very able in retaining the elements of the first, with winding paths and mechanical traps to challenge your attempts at gathering every item and completing the level. The scarecrows don't have the difficulty spike as in the original, but the hay monsters are easily some of the most cumbersome in the entire game, weak only to flame, and extremely difficult to take down otherwise. Given that this is a hack-and-slash adventure and not something more carefully instrumented like Monster Hunter, it's genuinely annoying to be forced in pulverizing them senselessly while also scouring the areas for fire sources that are at times spaced rather far from these soul-possessing monstrosities. Getting the chalice reward here is therefore one of the more frustrating, at least for me, making me wish we had access to the chicken drumstick at this point, which we don't since the dragon armor doesn't allow us such access until Dragon Island, so you're rather left to an underwhelming arsenal when dealing with them. Speaking of chickens, we have here a level requirement of guiding them back to their feet so we can progress further, another nuisance making this level a hard one to look forward to. Come on, feed yourselves, it's right there. But otherwise, the sense of scale in the background juxtaposed to a mysterious and invigorating skybox makes for an excellent setting construction, and there really is a sense of exploration just as the original did, with plowing through the fields and checking different areas around the crops to see what lies within these little crevices. It also retains the idea of farming equipment and processes acting as obstacles very effectively. The thrill of one instance coalesces with the next in near flawless fashion, allowing you to remain in a flow of movement between different forms of danger in your search for items, the chalice, and ultimately the exit. Annoying flaws aside, it largely succeeds in capturing the farmstead we first enjoyed, just not as well. Number 23. The Original Cemetery Hill. A bona fide classic along with the graveyard that precedes your arrival. It starts off with a powerful expression of Xerox's downward gaze emboldened by soft howls of winds among the hilltop, then activating gargoyles that perpetually churn out boulders down the path we need to ascend in continuing. What a kind reunion. The region continues in the artistic expression of the darker contrasting colors that allow lighting to better reflect a mood of nighttime met with life and motion through the restless dead. Music meets us here with a combination of sounds that combine well with the hilltop's thundering rocks and mysterious surrounding fields.
I remember not knowing of the drop available to the player here which granted access to the club, thinking initially one would have to return here after the mausoleum itself. But MediEvil has a way of rewarding Dan when he takes a leap of faith. Or maybe it was just me, it is after all not that hidden. A little more obscure perhaps is the entrance beneath the hill blocked by a breakable barrier. First-time players may notice this and understandably forget its presence and proceed on to the hilltop's exit. But inside is the reward of a whole nother section which houses the all-important witch talisman and a chalice guarded by a fire-lit mechanism and its surrounding caged undead. It's a joy to uncover initially, with a lingering fondness regarding the context design. It almost feels as though you're not even at the hilltop anymore. What I do wish had been done is to make full use of the ground level environment, a complete surrounding of the hill as opposed to the semicircular space provided for us. It's a complaint we've heard before, I know, but it will continue on with this list as it is such a widespread realization of MediEvil's content, and often the last if not sole disappointment of a level experience. That there is a clear indication of a wider design potential not brought out when a team such as Cambridge Studio was more than capable of executing on. Am I being nitpicky, even obtuse? Absolutely, as I regard Cemetery Hill highly given that this is still in the introductory phase of MediEvil's universe, and it accomplishes various feats such as encouragement of scrutiny and overcoming new obstacles with very acceptable results. So despite my complaints about what isn't there, what is present is itself strong, and together crafts for us a memorable excursion.
Number 22. Return to the Graveyard from Resurrection, which is 13 whole spots past the original version. Wow, this must be a total banger, right?
Well, not quite just that, but let me explain why I believe it holds up better. The essence of traversing through previous graveyard territory is patterned in tandem, in that you're backtracking from where you left off, just now with a key to continue on the stained glass door with, and it is within this part of the graveyard that the improvements unfold. They scrap the gimmick requiring you, rather annoyingly, to slowly push boulder stones off into a creek, and replace the latter section with a set of cliff sides that connect between gates opened by the familiar angel's gazes. I complained before about the simplicity of its use in the graveyard level on PSP, and it is here that we see it reborn and revamped with more interesting progress design, requiring you to note how these pathways and conduits operate against one another, and I think it's done rather splendidly. A bright grey emphasis here, cast against a bold green demise below you, adds a kind of lightness to your movement on the paths, and is a delight in its own right, appropriate to what is essentially a giant site, majestic in its expression of ascending past the proletariat riffraff gravestones and onto the more bourgeois resting places before we carry on into Gallomir's wider terrains. I mean, just look at what these people have in their grave sites. That could pay my rent for years. The final improvement, which was not replaced, is the boss encounter, now captured in a more grisly and cinematic initiation. While putting the pack to rest is not itself noteworthy, the transition to the more imposing wolves is a smart change, further stimulating the fight into an experience that thematically dictates the odds are against you. It's a very cool clip that sets the stage better than the first game did by developing your challenge between two phases. It's still not the remarkable fight we'd see in other games at the time, but is no doubt an improvement in boss animations and visuals, giving the players something higher in standard to overcome. A proper and well-improved send-off to Gallomir beyond the grave.
Number 21. The Time Device. This is one of those levels where I wonder what recreational drugs were being passed around as the devs attempted to contrive another level, because wow, does the time device stand out from the rest, and in all the right ways. Jokes aside about devs tripping out during game design, this is some of the most imaginative level design in the series. Time is the inescapable theme, with clocks and various devices measuring this elusive force, flying and situated wherever you go. Xerox guards populate this area, adding the presence of enclosing evil given how close you are to his lair. Once they were taking it to you in Sleeping Village, and now you're taking it to them here, in the clockwork belly of the beast. Everything coming full circle in a manner of speaking, just as the hands of time themselves are ordained to do. Platforming is an essential component of traversal here, but unlike other previous regions such as the Ghost Ship, it's well executed, connected to other portions without the ship's frustrating trial and error. You can, of course, easily lose yourself to gravity and gulp a life bottle in these mistakes, but it doesn't feel as cheap. I remember the first time I ever reached the train as an adolescent, thinking, no, do I get to ride this?
And though my hopes were dashed a little that this is just a mechanism for leaving the level, it was a pleasure to search out the necessary rooms while also moving the pedestal like a clock in order to unlock its use. An issue I had with the level though was the giant clock platform at the level's beginning. It's not a bad idea, still well established within what the level is expressing, but it was just a little annoying to have to punch in the appropriate time for a gate, and then do so again, and maybe again, to gain or regain access to different pathways. Again, not a bad idea. I just wish they had altered it slightly, like finding a secret time code within the level and then automatically inputting it each time you visited the corresponding door. I suppose though that would just be like fitting a rune in, so basically the mechanic of MediEvil. Probably a good thing I'm not a game developer. What is likely the player's last life bottle in the game is hidden away in this manner, with you having to reopen one entrance and then reopening the other one afterwards. But otherwise, this is a classic example of a successful MediEvil level, where multiple facets come together and work well in unison. I think it's time for another coffee. Number 20. The Hilltop Mausoleum from Resurrection. Indeed, another tall order for Gamebridge to attempt at a retry for what is a resounding favorite among fans in the original game. This is a great recreation of a beloved piece in Fortesque history, and a superb way to kick off the top 20. After a superfluously lengthened intro with Zarok, we are free to roam the main atrium beneath soft chants and darkly lit beams gently dropping through the church windows, emanating the tone set both here and what we remember from the mausoleum we first enjoyed. Zombies are curiously placed here, but our favorite weapon thieves soon reveal themselves in their maniacal glory. The basement section is largely the same. Floors collapsing after retrieving the key piece housed in each final room before being rendered non-existent after a few sprints backwards, which could have used an iteration of sorts, like adding obstacles or distributing the path outwards in maze-like fashion. The organist plays a more pivotal role this time around, sharing with Dan the plea for new music to play against the dark forces that control him, which is now a requirement for completion as opposed to a more secretive and exploratory mechanism of the first game. A hidden room behind a cracked wall is a welcome idea, though a tad too noticeable given it's punctuated tightly in a corner against your pointed camera as you attempt to make your way back upwards. But hey, you get a life bottle, some money, and access to a gargoyle. Pretty sweet. After lighting the pulse beneath the mausoleum's hidden heart of darkness, a very nice play here if it was intended, we are beckoned again to the transept of the church, hosted malevolently by a stained glass window ready to be borne out in its physical avarice. The fight is almost indistinguishable from the original, and that is to a fault. This is one of the most memorable instances of the authentic introduction to the MediEvil experience of encountering major adversaries, and is merely given a visual makeover in this version. The fight operates around aiming for the heart when presented vulnerable, with intervals of attacks to be avoided until the demon, failing to learn, unfolds his heart again to be shot under relentless missile fire. Just as the first one did, and with less fitting music this time too, I might add. It's a difficult experience to reconsider in a remake, and I choose to focus more on what it did well, which there is a good deal of here. It's vividly expressed in respectful testament to the mausoleum we know, and still deserving of initiating the final third of this MediEvil list. Number 19. The Sewers from MediEvil 2. The music lends itself to a mood that has not forgotten what we have just experienced through Dan, with its slower and melancholy tone that suspends over us in every room, illustrating our time here as somber in spite of the tragedy our dear protagonist now endures. It provides a sense of sorrow, gloom, and yet a tinge of ever-increasing hope, and that we must with Dan, as we do in life ourselves, keep going. It's a tone shift that is well executed given the aftershock of Whitechapel's finale, where we felt through Dan not only a broken heart, but the all-consuming gravity of failure. So while there is humor here to help lighten the mood a bit and remind us that this is a game with cheeky English roots, it is also transparent in its presentation of our lovable protagonist grieving while pressing on. The Sewers is indeed a descent of sorts, with a clever twist of indicating colorful life below that ultimately gives Dan the hope he needs to persevere as the hero we know him to be. The Dan hand navigational puzzles are some of the best in the game, and I can't fault anything in the efforts made for what is a well-constructed obstacle that isn't overly challenging while also having a steady flow in switching between Dan's body and brain in piecing the path together. The village and surrounding spaces grant the sewers an endearing community, a group of creatures with their own culture, all brought to life with inhabitants maintaining patrol of their territory and even tending their own beasts. Rescuing waifus succeeds in forcing the search mechanism, allowing us to explore here with greater depth, though with repetitive encounters of what is an enemy that lacks substance. These tentacles just aren't fun to combat, and I'd argue don't belong as an entity in this franchise. Seriously, what are these doing in a MediEvil game? Go back to the depths of hentai from whence you came. While not all of the mechanics deliver fully, it is the overall conceptual design that shines here, and the sewers remains one of the most thoughtfully crafted levels when it comes to embracing the player with a soft landing after a climactic blow, easing us back into the experience of MediEvil 2, with a hope renewed in our attempt now to rewrite the past with time travel. The following mini-episodes may fall short after our time here, as we saw many spots earlier on the list, but that speaks to the strengths we've enjoyed here as opposed to the Time Machine levels to come. Well done.
Number 18, Scurvy Docks from Resurrection. The developers absolutely outdid themselves with this replacement and a blueprint for how reimaginings in games should be brought to life. Not only were we spared from the frustrations of both the lake monsters and boardwalks of the original lake level that this region references, but we've now been embarked with the central mission of gathering garb to come across as a pirate captain in order to obtain a ship for Dragon Island. It's both clever and charming how you come across these items, such as finding a fish in the market to throw in a fountain for luring a bird to be fixed on your shoulder. The caves and cliffsides add a dynamic to the level that keeps it interesting, and if you're anything like myself, you may be making a few rounds here to figure out how to claim all the necessary goodies permeated within, a sure sign of thoughtful level creativity, where exploration is required to make the most of your time here and to rewarding effect. And that's not even mentioning a quaint town square, a graveyard excellently crafted above the town, and even a full-scale dock pirate ship with a cannon installed against its side for you to play around with. There's also a life bottle and coins hidden for the discerning player, which is a godsend in Resurrection, and a boon to one's satisfaction. Never gets old picking one of these up. And everything lauded so far is cast against a skybox of wonderfully blended moods, a vast ocean with green mists levitating between these waters and the endless orange-pink hues above, buoyant by a soundtrack that makes one want to set sail at a wind's notice. My only gripe is the emptiness in some parts of the level, such as the structures and premises along the dock, as though the developers had plans to make use of them for various landmarks, but are rather just there for presentation or as a loose connection to the rest of the design. This complaint can honestly perish in thought, as it doesn't even shadow the craftsmanship of what was accomplished here, one of the finest levels in Resurrection bar none, an improvement on MediEvil's Lake in every regard while infusing so much new content into what feels like a genuine adventure within the realm of ghost pirate mayhem. I will say before moving on, if it isn't apparent already with this placement, that this is where we've entered into the level ranking territory where all following regions are preceded with excitement. Every level moving forward is, in my view, excellent, with a robustness and quality that at the very least largely supersedes what flaws it may possess. The wait is over, my friends. The bangers are here, and I think Scurvy Docks is worthy of introducing us now onto the path of awakening greatness within this wonderful series. Let's see what said greatness from MediEvil is in the next spot. Number 17, The Museum from MediEvil 2. The strongest of the bunch when it comes to an introductory level, without a doubt. Bob and Barn deliver a piece that is immediately compelling in its evocation of reawakening life within the mystery of a Victorian museum. Your first encounter with zombies welcomes you back with a differentiation in engagement, limbs splitting and falling off as you attack, increasing with difficulty as you traverse from one room to the next. The odd appearance of dinosaurs impeding your path adds a cool sort of dread to the level, as though the very dead life running rampant is trying to keep you here. Each room possesses purpose in your exploratory cravings, seamlessly inviting you forward into other sections that attract you further to both the level's end and what matter of interest is apparent in one's immediate surroundings for the player's delight. The cannonball puzzle is also fulfilling, and I still to this day find it enjoyable given that it's an excuse to explore other rooms of interest that add a scenic context to the entire level.
I also have to note what I thought was a brilliant touch, and that is all the references to Eastern and African monuments and statues that are housed here, as though the developers were poking fun at the imperial nature of Victorian England, given how starkly these monoliths contrast to its geographical proximity. A soft and humorous remark that so much of what's inside this museum is that of stolen items from another land. Just like real life. Well done on that. I don't have much else to say other than that it lacks a little bit of ambition other levels execute on, but that's easily forgiven since this is the very first experience in MediEvil 2, which moves us into the 19th century setting with high-level engagement in every degree. I never cease in my excitement to replay the game with such an immersive start. They really don't make them like this anymore.
Number 16. Greenwich Observatory from MediEvil 2. As many times before, I have to begin with the soundtrack here because it's quite a shift from everything previous. We could stand still before moving forward and know within the movements of sound that something is deeply amiss here. The player is treated to a Lovecraftian nightmare with music so haunting that it feels as though you cannot be safe even when every enemy around you has been seemingly laid to rest. The sign itself signifying the observatory ahead echoes the fear and unknown of what lies beyond, as Silent Hill had masterfully accomplished a year before in 1999. Before even being able to forge forward, a menacing seagull grips your skull and leaves you headless, introducing us to a new way of play by switching between bodily Dan and what Dan sees in his stationary body-free form. He doesn't seem to mind it too much though. As we progress, it's presented to us in different ways how these mechanics play out. You are able to look ahead as Dan's head to uncover a code, for instance, and being free of your skull actually makes you vulnerable to the parasitic organism predatorily looking for hosts to crown. It's a level with a fair length, and various set pieces scattered here to remind us of what this used to be. A harbor once operated for trade among sailors, now drained of its purpose and left in an opportunistic state of exploitation by Cthulhu-like monstrosities. Truly, it's a graveyard of sorts, the ships and environment as dead as the unliving here, which helps to emanate its stirring mood within us. It's unsettling from beginning to end, making it a surprisingly excellent departure from what we know about MediEvil style. The horror-stricken observatory is thus among some of the finest in MediEvil's strong lineup of regions, for its enterprising attempt in adding something completely different, with a resounding success.
Number 15. The Asylum Grounds from MediEvil. Were you expecting this level a while ago? Were you hoping it would be further up on this list? Before I put this video together, Asylum Grounds was one of my most difficult to place given how much it attempts to accomplish. But after some consideration, some meditation, and a silent retreat out in the rolling hills of northern Manitoba, I decided, number 15 sounds good. Also, I like the music. Let's use it for my intermissions. What is not debatable here is that it is a classic, a quintessential case in Cambridge Studios' daring melting pot of ideas boiling over into what is the horticultural madness of Xerox psyche manifested in many forms of a garden's creative challenges. It is tremendously inventive, bubbly in its presentation, and a great showcase for exploration within the context of riddles. It is the quality of these riddles, case by case, which may divide some of us in how we judge the region's overall caliber. I don't know anyone who said they enjoyed timing out the various mask signs to align appropriately in activating the Jester solution, as well as the mouse challenge, which has you guiding a creature around feline knees toward the solution of an elephant. It's a great time, said no one ever. That said, I never bore of maneuvering along the maze's lines, hunting stars for one riddle, returning to find new openings as the mad maze expands, and ultimately launching forward to the asylum after a little game of chess. The artistry in some of these ideas alone is enough to have kept this level high on the list. But what ties everything together is not just a mechanic, but an actual character. He needs no introduction, but the foundation of Asylum Grounds rests in Jack of the Green. From his dark and hilariously dry introduction to his increasingly exasperated attempts to stump you with his brain twisters, it is his character that binds this level together, ceaselessly reminding you that he is the warden of Xerox Wart property and is immutable in its comical value after countless playthroughs. Jack adds value in offsetting the debauched garden atmosphere with humor that will stay with you long after solving your path to freedom. So much of what you interact with here is a product of caring creativity, and Jack of the Green only serves to brighten the level's portrait in its final form, which I consider to be a medieval experience resolutely cherished.
Puzzles so fiendishly difficult, so perplexingly complex, that no man has ever solved them. Ha ha ha.
Love it. Thank you, friend. Couldn't have said it better myself.
Number 14. The Count from MediEvil 2. Uneventful boss fights have populated more than I care to mention on this list, and I've remarked superfluously on how this series just doesn't do these encounters well. And yet, we are graced with a few, such as the Rex and Stained Glass Demon. Most forcibly, my favorite of them all, though, is the Count of Wolfram Hall. His imposing presence, arrayed in grotesquely sinister garb, is immediately broken in classic Cambridge studio fashion with a stroke of endearing English humor. After rushing the Count's words, Dan's fate is sealed, and we are compelled to fight. As Winston informs you before the fight, it's a matter of brains over brawn. Reflect on what I've said, he slyly remarks, leading the player to borrow the actions from the previous mansion sections and to exercise them here on the Count. Your weapons are no good, so this is a battle of managing your space around him while evading his attacks and baiting him into targeting the mirrors, which literally backfire. Phase 2 opens with elevated range bombardments and a more aggressive melee pursuit of Dan. Again, the mirrors serve you here, and the player eventually discovers that they reflect the light above, which the Count has cleverly disregarded from attacking you with. It's a masterfully constructed boss fight that's divided between two different playstyles, yet within the same approach of reflecting light back. The battle is more epic than it has any right to be, as we are about halfway through the game at this point, with what feels like a final showdown of sorts, compounded ever more by another incredible work by B&B, elevating the entire choral levels above most fights you'll encounter during Dan's escapades. The ending is oddly dim, strange even, with the bitter tears echoed by the vampire Count after his defeat. Dan disregards it almost coldly before casually leaving the scene. Sheesh. I suppose even our boy Dan has a bit of a dark side, just like the rest of us. No matter. The Count stands tall among his competition within the series as a strong presentation of boss mechanics, even reaching perhaps to the heights of other famous titles and their adversarial engagements. Mood, lighting, audio, and setting all joined together in what I think is one of Cambridge's finest spectacle battles, and something that could stand as a model among others for its time. Number 13. Cathedral Spires from MediEvil 2. The scenic overview you're given of this cathedral gone dark is excellent, ominous, and intimidating, with a gothically dynamic presentation that indicates you are knocking on the finale's gate. You're finally here. It also communicates what you'll be doing a fair bit of to reach the tower's entrance. Climbing, which up to this point hasn't been a skill challenge aside from Naval Academy. Here you'll be avoiding the oil cast down at a speed that's very difficult to time your way around. Of course, that's until you figure out that you can just stay to the left side. Statues emanating fire lances also require your attention and can knock your progress back if you miscalculate. The same goes for the oil cauldrons and the demon's projectiles aimed at you. The ascent is difficult, and everything is trying to ruin your day by pushing you back and wearing you down. This can be made worse if you pass by any spirits in need of rescuing. Yes, like the infamous ant caves, you're required to capture spirits both here and in the descent to follow. Should you miss out on one that is, say, close by the entrance, you will have no choice but to backtrack and make your way back up without any handicap or assistance. This is where I am most conflicted on the final levels altogether. While the Spires is a little easier than the descent, it still hits with gusto and is a major spike in challenge from what we've previously faced. This would be fine if there were a little more charity in providing health fountains and vials, but there's little to be had here, so you are fully reliant on your inventory from this point on.
There is no shame in farming life-giving sections from previous levels prior to conquering the endgame. Trust me, you will need everything you can here because it only becomes more excruciating the deeper you go, as we made very clear when reminiscing over the mercilessly punishing descent at spot 34. That all aside, the amber glow of demonic casting from the main spire juxtaposed by the flying creatures eager of your doom provide a never-ending sense that the end is nigh, and you are here to stop it. The soundtrack prevails along these visuals to give you the impact of your mission here, and it's why I think it's a great contender for this spot on the list. It looks, feels, and plays like an endgame region with exceptional craft. You've made it this far. Keep going. Number 12, the Hilltop Mausoleum from MediEvil.
A brilliant level for just the spirit of its creation, which expresses the franchise in almost every facet. The organ imposing you with its sounds, the ensuing chaos of gremlins leaping out of coffin lids, and collapsing floors all display the maniacal and infatuating character that this church elicits in us. Recall the aura that was outlined in the PSP version of the mausoleum, and imagine the forcefulness of its artistic direction elevated even higher. This is the MediEvil we know and love, a paradox of gothic sensations delightfully projected through unexpected color schemes that somehow brighten foyers and rooms without compromising on the dark undertones of a diabolical presence objecting to Fortesque's arrival. A constant motion against the game's attempts to return Dan to his coffin while managing around dangerous surprises like crumbling halls, weapon thieves, and our very first boss fight in the game. It is in the church's nave where we're invited to notice a locked gate to an altar space that hosts on its foundation the wickedly chilling window painted in the stillness of evil. We discern our way forward by going downwards, our introduction to layers and a kind of spatial renewal in understanding how levels in this game might unfold as we progress in MediEvil. The floors here have claimed countless first-time players, as have the gremlins done so with our weapons, all striking in us in this introductory phase of the game that you never quite know what to expect after a level's loading screen, and that Cambridge Studio are grandmasters of turning conventional gaming ideas and mechanics on their heads. The soundtrack, as mentioned, has something compelling in its composition, not just in its soul-stirring evocations, but in the speed with which it coalesces into the level's demands for how we are meant to move with quickness in order to survive. The organist doesn't beckon us directly, and we're rather invited to aid him in his agony by locating and sharing a new piece of music, a moment of immeasurable satisfaction upon completing for the first time, with a resounding joy upon future playthroughs. Okay, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but I just really like this level. And then, to wrap up the experience is a moment so iconic in MediEvil that videos have been made on its ability to disrupt with great efficacy against other boss experiences that failed to meet it in quality. My friends, I give you the Stained Glass Demon, and a jump scare so frightening for 8-year-old me that I've never quite forgotten. I love how both Resurrection and Remake took pains in colorizing this infamous creature, but I dare say that the original did it best. Primitive and timeless in its presentation, exactly what a boss should do, which is to elicit danger and the constant threat of punishing attacks should we lose our focus to greed. Shattered into iridescent pieces is rewarding on its own, and we leave with a key in our return to the graveyard. You could argue this should be higher, but it is so competitive at this point, and spot number 12 is nothing to be disappointed in. The Mausoleum remains a classic, and a defining collection of delightful features we identify so closely with MediEvil.
Number 11, Enchanted Earth from MediEvil. One can immediately characterize this region as mysterious. You are met with the same spellbinding music of Sleeping Village, and oddly, no soul-carrying adversaries, but rather nature run amok. The mood is set excellently. Frog ribbits and toxic projectiles collide with their forest setting, eventually birthing in the player's mind that perhaps there's much more veiled against our awareness. You are in danger, yet the design and audio create a sense that something even worse is afoot, especially when you read that demons are housed here. Perhaps the highlight is operating the gondola past the treetops, elevated beyond view of any fields or trees, mere blackness shrouding what is below with clouds intermittently gliding across its opaque plain of doom. I always felt bad about pushing these eggs away from the massive mother bird at the apex of this level, and yet find something awesome about this setup we navigate through for maybe half a minute. It's a very inventive expose inserted into what is already a very well-crafted level. If you so wish, you may use the Witch's Talisman here to summon her for a romp against some ants. Given where Ant Caves is on this list, you'd understandably pass this one by, even if it meant foregoing a stop at the Hall of Heroes. And that is all only based on the original portion of this level, should you not be carrying the demon artifact. Once you bring it with, a puzzle awaits where, upon completion, a seizure-inducing light show blasts on the screen, which I'll spare you from seeing, and you're able to forge ahead against the damning move you've made of releasing these monsters into the world of Gallowmere. They're resilient and demand good use of your weapons that your inventory hosts, especially your ranged weaponry, given a boss fight consisting of 2 flyers require them. The shifting and tilting platform is debatable in the matter of cheap deaths, but I recall this being about on par with other similar physics at the time, and therefore not something I've ever actually had an issue with. That's totally anecdotal, I know, but I can only be honest in that I find it a difficult factor in the fight without thinking it goes too far. We've already seen a lot of that on this list anyway. The Enchanted Earth could be called the Haunted Woods, an example of European folklore told to children before bed so they can behave. The enchantments we feel here are in the mesmerizing sounds of musical transitions that reflect the hidden shadows of an evil archive, extended into the layout as both we, the player, and Dan eventually let loose their malice into Gallowmere. We may feel witless along with Dan as we accomplish this twist in the narrative, which is well done by Cambridge, but eventually triumphant in understanding this as a part of a larger role in our pursuit of liberating the kingdom from Xerox magic. The Enchanted Earth's eerie setting forever roots this transition between 2 remarkable halves of the game, and is itself indispensable as a key piece in MediEvil's holistic world, and on its own, as a folk fantasy level brilliantly realized. Well, hello there. Very nice to see you again. Can you believe it? We've made it to the top 10. We've gone through 50 levels, which is quite a few. We've gone through some stinkers, we've gone through some rough ones. We've also gone through some really good ones too, haven't we? And here we are, the final 10. Let's drink to that, shall we? Why does it keep doing that? Anyway, why don't we head on to number 10, see where things go from here. And remember, all 3 titles are still in the writing: MediEvil, MediEvil 2, and Resurrection. I wonder which one will be out of the top 10 first. I guess we'll have to see. Let's have a look. I know that music. Are we going to a carnival? Yes, we're starting off this top 10 with the Freak Show. Bearded ladies, mechanical elephants, aquatic monstrosities, our old friends the imps, and... oh dear. Come on, Cambridge. The level is named the Freak Show, and we definitely recognize what we're in for after seconds of play. This is actually one of the regions that is very focused on combat given how many enemy types we encounter. In large number as well, which makes our chalice retrieval that much more rewarding. The length and layout of the circus is massive and multifaceted, absolutely one of the most all-out constructions the devs have given us, a tad reminiscent to me of the fair level, Witchy World, from Banjo-Tooie. Platforming takes its place here among various trampoline placements, perhaps most challenging among the waters of whatever is lurking and laughing beneath. They're difficult to navigate, but I honestly don't think they're unfair, and are an improvement on other regions I've complained about rather pettily earlier on the list. There is even a section at the beginning which tantalizes the player with currency innocently placed on top of a rock cleft, just out of reach, though tempting players enough to drop to their deaths in an effort to reach it. Rings of Dark Souls and other games that came later, teaching one to practice awareness and patience. A tunnel to this area is not much further ahead, leading you to the goodies kept here. I have used the dash ability in the past to retrieve it, but the placement is clearly meant to be observed and tackled with a sort of mindfulness. I love it. What I perhaps love most is this tunnel. Come on, this is the best trip stair I've seen in a PS1 game, soothing you into methodically softening shifts of colors and shapes. You are getting sleepy. You will like this video. When you grab your phone, you will post this tag on every social outlet possible. That it's such a small part of the level, indicating a sense of care in crafting what is truly a space of never-ending madness. After continuing on and recognizing you weren't on mushrooms, is one of the mechanical elephants we're required to take down, borrowing a page out of the Scarecrow Fields. Some things just never change. We encounter 2 of these until the final weapon, which is vulnerable to heavy things inconveniently hung above the circular trail that it meanders. Works for Dan. I could go on. This level breathes vividness in its creativity as a MediEvil-styled part of Dan's adventure, backed by a soundtrack that excellently captures the weird and goofy environment we are meant to push through. Landmarks abound for Dan to investigate, to play with, to combat, and to simply enjoy as we hunt down the weapons, as is our mission here. There's no harm in having fun along the way, and indeed we do in this pandemonium of festive disorder. One of MediEvil 2's finest. Long live the freak show. And next, at number 9, is Pumpkin Gorge from Resurrection. Wow, look at that. Was it Providence that led us here to bear this jewel on the crown's archway in celebration of MediEvil's greatest as an extension of the oft-forgotten handheld remake? Probably. But this placement is not meant to be a controversial take, as I truly believe it supersedes and elevates on the original, and by quite a margin. Traversing within dilapidated structures and platforming without as much frustration is already a much-needed improvement on what the first MediEvil provided. Virtually all space here is open in an invitational sense, to be rummaged in playfully, enjoyed, and with the pleasurable relaxation of how these yards, pathways, and why are these tentacles here? I already said I didn't like them in the sewers. Why are they putting hentai in my MediEvil? Anyway, I was just basically trying to comment on how it successfully connects each area together without having to linearly backtrack too much as the Gorge in MediEvil did, which allows the player to constantly feel motivated in progressing with their mission. Or missions, rather, as we're tasked with several different means of progress while here. One of them is locating the veined roots of gourd corruption, all of which are fun and satisfying to locate, protruding before a hut and preventing our access to a farmer who grants us a pumpkin key for future use. Inscrutable players will walk past and uncover one of a few well-established and rewarding secrets that this level wondrously inhabits. The Pumpkin Witch is further ahead and considerably less charming than her motherly counterpart in the original MediEvil, who likewise requests we take care of a giant pumpkin. You see what's going on here? Pumpkin Gorge of Resurrection combines both the Gorge and Pumpkin Serpent together, which delivers the level I never knew I wanted from MediEvil. It pushes forward in quantity of content from the Serpent's farmstead into the Gorge we now navigate, with no cost to the quality. Rather, this blend of the two abundantly raises the standard within the series by forging into a single experience the best of what both levels offer, while leaving their flaws behind. Every time I enter this level, I am set into handheld bliss to repeat its plentiful joys and regain the sense of adventure it effortlessly allows me to feel as I move within what feels like a fairy tale right out of the Grimm brothers' imagination. What was a relatively forgettable level in MediEvil is given new life on PSP, and with striking relish. Nothing feels dull or as a chore, which the reference levels did for me, and I gleefully dub this without a second thought as the best of Resurrection. Well done to the team on this achievement, but that marks the final level from the PSP title to appear on our list today. It was a very rough start for Resurrection, but it was able to climb its way into the top 10 with this wonderful entry. Bravo! You may now have your rest and join us in anticipating what will claim the coveted chalice at number 1. With 8 remaining positions between 2 games, the stage is set for a duel among the best that both original PlayStation titles have to offer. Which one will be next to take its rest alongside this awesome level?
And next, at number 8, is Kensington from MediEvil 2. This was surreal my first time playing. The game was already off to a great start, having escaped a museum gone wild and a triumph over its prehistoric glory. And now I'm being told as a player that I'm free to traverse a section of Victorian London? Even inside some of these curious structures? It reminds one of the Sleeping Village and the strengths that level played to. A soundtrack that swings from whimsical to ominous only accentuates the various tones that Kensington is meant to imbue the player with as they move along the cobblestone streets beneath gothic light fixtures and among the now risen dead. Remember what I said about the officer mechanic back on the ghost ship? I think the devs found the solution here, in forcing you to batter the group of zombies first as the gentleman enjoys his invincibility,
but left vulnerable after his lads are done with. Even the gibberish they utter is reminiscent of stereotypical English aristocracy, which I adore and thank the devs for adding. The level itself is laid out with a bit of difficulty and takes some commitment in understanding its paths and entrances, winding conduits begging to be connected, which is a strength allowing the level to easily retain its ability to be enjoyed again and again. Even as you dash without end in search of your next task, you are accompanied by the living vistas of architecture adorning the experience with an immersive setting, meaningfully populated with the cultural dwellings of our own doing in history. I appreciate too how well the chalice is hidden. Knocking a bell to ring a train over serves the reason for why tracks exist over the passes between the tunnels you come and go through. Almost everything serves a delightful purpose here, and Kensington makes great use of its landmarks. It is the level that introduces us to the inner workings of an antagonist's desires, which is properly situated in his study, with points of interest that meaningfully remind us we are among the public premises of our humanity. One surprise after another embarks us, refreshing every discovery made here with a reaction most splendid. Kensington is the true welcome to the wider world of MediEvil 2, and it was somehow already able to transcend the player's initiation within the museum, a true demonstration of high-quality design choices that fruitfully join into a marvelous Victorian cityscape. Well done, Cambridge. Well done. And next at number 7 is Kew Gardens from MediEvil 2. I never tire of the music here, the soft opening that follows the cutscene gradually elevating itself to its crescendo with a sudden glide downwards among the woodwinds that cradle each sound with care, and all among an environment perfectly suited for it. Welcome to Kew Gardens, another marvel in MediEvil's level roster. What we first notice, assuming we've played the first MediEvil title, is the callback to the pumpkin-themed region, where its corruption has entwined an entire greenhouse with groups of unfortunate victims trapped inside. The monsters here are harder to put down, with defense mechanisms in both the form of a guard and a natural immunity to blunt force. You're rather best kept to sharper methods here, the axe working wonders if you have been able to collect every chalice up to this point. You can literally uproot these guys with a single throw as they climb to the surface. Not only are they your main adversarial flavor in these parts, but they're also the predators of the poor folks scattered around the facility. They are kept in 3 different rooms, and all of them pressure you to both eliminate the evil vegetation while ensuring none of the citizens succumb to their infectious attacks. As with the sleeping village, souls can be lost if they're not well protected, and too many lost will prevent you from collecting the chalice, which is well hidden here actually, appreciate that. As you take down these pumpkins, they'll drop antidotes which are equipped and then used in MediEvil 1 lightning fashion to cure the humans of their ailments. I love this mechanic, reminding us in rather punctual terms that we're playing the hero here, not just by swinging away at baddies, but actually making an effort to protect the vulnerable. Well, if we so choose to, of course. The platforming here, as with the series more generally, can be a nuisance in navigating the leaves jutting out of the trees around the interior, and even leading you to fall deaths. But some of it is made up for with more forgiving open petals that you open by collecting wheel cogs which set off fountains above. This brings us to another excellent mechanic. 3 differently colored wheels are hidden throughout the level which are used to open more spaces within for you to explore, and a fair amount more than your average level in the series, so you will have to make note to yourself as to how the level connects as you play. It's honestly close to a masterclass in design, and I only consider it otherwise because the backtracking can be frustrating given the lack of shortcuts set here. A ladder outside, for instance, would have been nice, thank you very much. That said, this is the team once again putting many ideas together which results in one of the most pleasurable of Dan's ordeals in the franchise. Oh, and I didn't even mention the giant pumpkins. Just look at them, they're huge! How wonderful. It's just a nice touch to keeping you on your feet while you're here. And I mean literally, run like the dickens when you see one. As a little bonus, there is also a hidden minigame as a cherry on top of this pumpkin pie, which I didn't know about until many future playthroughs. Why not give it a try? Overall, it orchestrates what we've come to love about the series with its sequel setting of the Victorian era and shout back to the first and grim fantastical universe in the series, with all aspects of its construction given the wondrous declaration of a gothic world run chaotic, with Dan thrown straight into its nexus. And in these gardens, we bear witness to the dev team's distinctive creativity firing on all cylinders, and it is nothing short of excellent. Number 6 is the Crystal Caves from MediEvil. In terms of atmosphere, it may be unrivaled. When I first played the PlayStation Underground demo disc with MediEvil, this music was what engrossed me into the world of Gallowmere. I remember first playing through the full game with an eagerness at the back of my mind as I hopped from one level to the next, feeling slightly amiss at the absence of such a softly enrapturing gothic composition, despite personally iterating among other great experiences in the game. Then you enter Crystal Caves, and the soft bars and chimes begin as you proceed on the narrow path before you, demons lightly afloat while the entrance behind you beckons the player to adventure deeper. I was no doubt enjoying my quest with Dan up to this point, but the special aura of MediEvil is felt in boundless effect here. The music could not be better suited anywhere else, and thankfully, the rest of the level is able to meet it in its psychologically gripping quality. Taurus demons add a dynamic of danger in addition to the imps here, but the true matter is the dragon which you read of as you explore. It's again a testament to MediEvil's ability to connect worlds together, as the dragon gems collected in other regions are required to take on the slumbering brute. The fight itself is also something I appreciate, again asking the player to adapt within new circumstances, pounding at the ground as you begin to notice the patterns of where the ceiling boulders drop from. Not that it broke new ground here, if we pardon the terrible pun, but it set out an encounter that is vibrant when set against other fights in the game, and is, I believe, a good successful example of Cambridge Studios' experimental ambitions at work. The dragon armor is a compelling reward, and I often start using it immediately as setting others aflame is a strangely satisfying method of gaining chalice souls. The circular design of the level only adds to its organized brilliance, satisfyingly connecting our mission to a single route among the shining treasures within, returning you to the rune placement which bars the exit, and close by the chalice now almost yours for the taking. Always has been one of the best, and always will be, as it visually beautifies a cavern's interior within a fantastical setting that is effortlessly able in melting the player away from the real world by casting our minds into the opalescence of scattered crystallic designs cascading past every corridor in luminous grandeur, heightened to its peak in audible bliss. It pains me not to put it any higher, but it's just not quite the very best in my view. But whoa, does it come close.
Hold it, please, sir. I need to see your membership card.
And so begins our entrance into the town of Whitechapel past the initial opening and into the top 5 of MediEvil. Oh, how I love a good case of déjà vu upon entering a level. What could be more of a welcome mat for Fortesque than a graveyard entrance with the greetings of the dead rising? As it turns out, this is but a small section of the level, which rather than the graveyard, expresses itself more closely to the sleeping village. I actually would go further and say Whitechapel is the spiritual successor to the famous village from the original MediEvil, with its winding night-shadowed streets and aggressive human NPCs. You are here looking for Kia, who was seen going into a nightclub which apparently needs a membership card and a gentleman rocking some facial hair. So, in Sleeping Village fashion, we're on a treasure hunt around town. Cambridge, of course, knocks it out of the park with the comical presentation of the police force in town, their boisterous and overly expressive movements and their frustrated grunts coupled with lawfully adorned whistles. Combine that with how Dan appears running from them, and it's as heartwarming as it is hilarious. Whitechapel is generous in its palette of puzzles to interact with, and they're all a pleasure to pursue. An RGB panel must be correctly accorded its colors to unlock a key item beneath a foreboding beard-donned gentleman statue, and actually, that's sort of it for puzzles, but fret not, as we have an entire town's quarters to meander through in collectathoning our way into the club, requiring our analytical skills as a player in deciphering pathways not immediately apparent to initial discernment, and thus compels us into the revelry of exploration. Not only are we doing so within alleyways and below romantically lamplit streets, but also by visiting various homesteads and even dropping in unannounced after treading rooftops. Dan on a hand is used excellently, and just look at this. Man, that's so cool. Top 5 by default. The music is masterful, combining several moods together. The classic gothic we've accustomed ourselves to, but also with notes of curiosity, and I'd say that its increasing waves writhe within the vastness of night and the sinister foreboding of this area's conclusion. We've seen a fair few levels much earlier on this list sadly failing to connect various components of level design cohesively, and Whitechapel demonstrates the extreme opposite. Everything, as a certain previously mentioned village did, fastens together item placements for our uncovering as Dan in a resoundingly satisfying manner by structuring the town of Whitechapel as a bastion of spaces begging to be rummaged through for our leisure. The town is alive and dead all at once this night,
both in its artistic complexion and in regards to its inhabitants who feel the need to harass us in our efforts to look the part of a gentleman. And it totally pays off. Looking good, buddy. Our time in Whitechapel ends with a gut-wrenching episode of Jack the Ripper violently tearing through Kia and escaping with a final gaze of horror in our direction. Even without the depth of character development than, say, oh, what's her name? The game's rather famous. It'll come back to me. You feel the shock in the swiftness of the action executed against Kia and by extent through Dan and the player. Carrying her back is the tragic reversal of what I described earlier when we retrieved her from the museum, the sense of beauty and order now corrupted by the disorder of a villain's twisted self-interest. I understand this final cry by Dan will be lost by those not personally invested in the story or world of the game, which is just fine, but for a PlayStation game with developing 3D visuals, the scene is so vividly cast that I can't help but feel sad every time the final seconds show. It's a remarkable level not only in its brilliant design and fantastically connected activities, but also its capacity to remind us of our heartstrings' existence and to feel for the protagonist in his loss and the compelling sorrow of a mission failed at the cost of unsatisfyingly inescapable heartache. Oh, Aerith, yeah, Aerith, that's who I was trying to think of, from Final Fantasy. Sorry. Let's try to lighten the mood with the next entry. Okay, this is probably one of the worst options to set our hearts aflutter once more following tragedy, but number 4 goes to the imaginatively Stygian Haunted Ruins from MediEvil. The violin sings its sorrows for the lifeless castle you've now returned to. Chickens curiously move around until you read that they're to be fed. Curious indeed. The drawbridge then opens after the chickens catch a switch under some feed and you're back in the empty, lifeless arms of Peregrine's haunted ruins. The music beautifully captures your sad return as the inverse of celebration. There's nothing here except the darkness of night, demons, and a history lost to time. An exception is the farmers you see introduced hanging above fires, which are to be saved if you wish to collect the chalice. I remember when I first was interested enough in seeing where the farmers went, which was after multiple playthroughs, and was absolutely delighted to be thrust into a dialogue scene with treasure as a reward. Ah, the little things in life. Though the mood quickly returns to emptiness under the skybox of colors spelling a departed loneliness. Their souls are otherwise lost and you'll need to attempt again by beating the demon to the switch. It's a gimmick that not only adds a little purpose to our efforts, but binds us as a player to an understanding of a hero's place among the darkened atmosphere that envelops us in an inescapable state of loss. It makes the pursuit of liberating these farmers all the more satisfying upon success, and equally saddening in failure. This, my friends, is MediEvil at its best in atmosphere, something I would argue most games still struggle in fashioning today. Cannons pummel away an absurdly limitless function, and you traverse the castle walls upwards and towards the entrance of Peregrine's throne. The entire process is great, really, and forces you to take notice of your surroundings, all while managing one's mood above the cheerless void hopelessly harbored behind these crenellations. After retrieving the crown, you have your first ever encounter with Peregrine as the player, giving you his blessing before you're tasked with erupting the crater. The Guardians are a nice touch, though trivial to deal with when putting the dragon armor on, and the time sequence here adds one final hurrah of excitement to make your way back and to the catapult to be launched away from the castle's impending doom. I definitely failed this my very first attempts years ago, but love the pressurized context switch to making the player use previous section they may have noted before. It's a final touch that rewards you for your attention and maintains a successful thrill before being bolted away from the ticking destruction. The music, art, lighting, and design are all at their best here, and I don't have much to find fault with when considering these together. I suppose, facetiously speaking, the catapult is a drawback given that it launches you in the direction of a much worse level. I wish it had sent Dan elsewhere. My goodness. But the grimace of another level only speaks volumes of how well articulated the ideas of this region are. I know I've been harping away at the setting of Haunted Ruins, but there are so few games able to ghastly portray something like this sunless regal abode that allows the player such as myself to reclaim the level's ambience as though it were their first experience once again. It is due its roses and then some in this effect, and for every other achievement of inventive artistry it claims within its varied mechanics and brilliant arrangement of areas to explore. We are, after all, in the top 5. Where MediEvil radiates in its ideas fulfilled through gameplay dimensions materialized with ascendant execution. It is that great, and I only wish many more out there knew what is offered here if they gave this series a chance.
The Haunted Ruins, like other regions, is a blazing gem beneath the obscure soil of years passing the series by, with thousands more game projects rendering it more difficult to notice. We are so fortunate to know and experience MediEvil, and Haunted Ruins justifies this love for the wealth of imagination still present all these years later, and the spirit of this originality permeates many levels we've seen already, but especially the final 3 we are about to unveil. So what now will the Bronze Place Chalice go to? And the first chalice goes to Scarecrow Fields from MediEvil. I cannot even begin to tell you how close this was with Haunted Ruins for the bronze spot, and I'm sure it seems puzzling to some after how much I just gushed over the last level that it didn't even make the top 3. It after all exuded some of the best in overall design with audio that I'd say grants access to a deeper sense of our emotions than the farmsteads here shortly after leaving the graveyard. So allow me to make my case for why the Scarecrow Fields is this high, edging out wonders such as Whitechapel and Haunted Ruins. The very short explanation? It's an absolute banger. Note how light casts forward from a shadow pulled into the background, a skybox expressively stretched in a dark lavender sheet with the dead agriculture welcoming you further into wider Gallowmere's departure from life rendered here in dead crops and malevolent effigies. To have ourselves a little analogous fun, the description just made would be like moving our way onto a roller coaster, fastened and slowly ascending the rails. When the scarecrows appear and pursue with shadowing menace, alongside farmers rampaging out of haystacks, the ride has begun. And Scarecrow Fields is an unrestrained experience that ebbs and flows with unfading excitement from start to finish. From this point on, anything is possible and a surprise awaits you around every corner. You'll be dealing with said scarecrows and farmers one instance, suddenly locked then into a lane hunted by a giant imp-controlled mechanism, then navigating your way around a little cute and totally harmless corn maze, dancing your way betwixt production instruments, summoning a serpent, burning haystacks, bats, machines, and more. You are in never-ending motion with a zest for a mission of continuing your way through Gallomere's lands, practically vaulting from one challenge to the next in this gauntlet of an agrarian landscape consumed in psychopathic peril. The music accentuates all this with thrilling intonations and sound waves, itself much more upbeat than most other Bob and Barn recordings in the game, indicating the pace and liveliness it demands from us as Dan against the vivid changes we're embarked with, but also with a whimsical expression in many of its notational movements, which I think extend into the gameplay of the fields. That is, the mystery of what's around every corner and the reward that follows from our careful eye. Longtime players likely remember most fondly the first time they happened to pick up the harvester part, connecting this item to a previous section which allows you to combine its use with the harvester that graciously mows the lawn for us to reap our curiosity's rewards. It is easily one of the best designed secrets in the game and requires a backtracking past the precarious production line that doesn't feel arduous, especially after picking up that juicy life bottle. A thoughtfully orchestrated secret that I wish could have been more present in the remainder of the game, that nonetheless accomplishes its intended purpose with extraordinary fruition. It is in essence the composition of this level that anchors its position here on this list. With an action-packed array of obstacles and monsters and the variation of its hosting environment, which glows its bright fields nearly shrouded by the night sky and torn farming architecture noticeably shadowed in the distance, as a representation of what life and civilization was flourishing here, a theme we've explored prior. Everything we love about the series meets here in harmonious unison, every strength we've seen in previous regions conjoined into a gaming experience worthy of the title Masterclass, including but not limited to the mind-bending maze of Jack, the onslaught of adversaries from Xerox Madhouse, the mausoleum's unpredictable procession of traps, the evocative ecosystem of Enchanted Earth, the ghost ship's hazardous conditions, and the layout's connectivity we'd enjoy in the Time Device and Sleeping Village. We are only limited by our vocabulary for imagination to describe this level. It is chaos, it is surreal, it is speed, it is unpredictable, perilous, defiantly simple, maniacal, twisted, thrilling, artistic, high-octane, and dare I say, radical. But if I were to describe Scarecrow Fields, I would do so with 3 words. This is MediEvil. The Bronze Chalice is yours. And then there were 2. One from each respective PS1 title. The Silver Chalice goes to... Wolfram Hall from MediEvil 2. Gothic, macabre, sullen, and a sense split between mystery and loneliness grips you as you familiarize yourself with this manor. Wolfram Hall is perhaps the level that best defines MediEvil 2, with its reference to the Victorian period in its haunted spaces of antiquated wooden furniture, aristocracy portrayed along the walls, and in chandeliers suspended softly above you in their grandeur. What appear to be family members and staff have been placed under a black spell and corrupted against you, thinking you an intruder. Well, you actually do sneak in, steal the key, and invite yourself inside, so maybe they have a point. There's also old men who fart when you're sneaking around the basement. It's rather rude. You will be in constant wonder as you check this mansion's rooms, sleuthing for key items while avoiding harm by this massive home's inhabitants. The thematic element that ties this together, though, is the presence of vampires, all of whom you must mercilessly force into daylight by finding a punctuated light source, leaving them to grotesquely burn to death as they pursue you in a blaze of glory. I almost feel bad. The light sources you're meant to pursue is accessed within various rooms, each of which house at least 2 vampires asleep in their coffins, which can be pushed and pulled along with other furniture pieces to enclose them within daylight's loving embrace. If it doesn't look or sound obvious enough, these are problem-solving exercises, puzzles, with some of them being a little more open-ended. It only adds to what the player might be feeling in the back of their minds that we're coming closer to the true horror of this mansion as we leave each room triumphant in our efforts. Indeed, we went over this in spot 14 with the Count. Pretty cool guy. But the strengths most striking perhaps here lie in both the visual design of Wolfram Hall, along with Bob and Barn breathing life into its grimdark setting. Notice some of the designs that were added as engravings and statuettes among the space you walk here, and how evocative it resounds within the thematic notions described earlier. And then consider further how it is able to retain your attention within the midst of the music softly menacing you as you wander these halls. But that, of course, is not all. MediEvil excels most when its cauldron of ideas bubble together, responding to the player's standard of taste in its symphony of mechanics, music, and visuals interwoven together with poetic brilliance. This can be characterized in one of many instances within this grand hall, whereby you may be moving boxes as you exercise your critical thinking skills, but then suddenly enjoying the sunlight's breakthrough off in the corner of your vision, and further allured by this deliciously cadaverous music you're now enjoying. It is an experience I feel with full freshness as I embark again in this marvelous feat of game design that we merely label by its fictitious name, Wolfram Hall. The more I explore its lodging so delicately crafted, the more I want to stay. Every shift made from each carefully considered quarter draws me into desiring more to unmask what mysteries lie within. I cannot get enough of this mansion. I knew this level would be high for me personally, and yet the more I speak on it, the deeper I feel for its ability to continue invigorating me more than 2 decades later. It cannot be understated in my view. This is one of the very best in MediEvil, and perhaps one of the finest set pieces related to 19th century England in any video game.
Whoa! Just like that, we are at the number 1 spot. And man, do I love Wolfram Hall. Do I love Scarecrow Fields, Haunted Ruins, and so on going back up the list. I really, really do. So it's been tough up to this point. But this is it. We are at the last level. We are at the level that I think is the very best in the entire series, and one of my personal favorite experiences in all of gaming. So I think this calls for a proper transition to what should be a celebration. So, where is he? Mr. Skelly, he comes over often. He makes coffee. We hang out. He's a good guy. Put down the coffee. We need a little bit of a laugh. You know, that famous laugh of yours to get us going for the final level. You will? Thank you so much. What a great guy. Anyway, let's have a look. Here is the best level in MediEvil. Nice.
Bearing among the dim streets, just as the original Sleeping Village accomplished.
It reminds one of the Sleeping Village and the strengths that level played to. As with the Sleeping Village, expresses itself more closely to the Sleeping Village, and that is what the Sleeping Village is all about. Everything is linked in the village. Once they were taking it to you in Sleeping Village, and now you're taking it to them here. But they were tasked with recreating one of the most established landmarks of the entire franchise. How do you even begin with something so imaginative as the Sleeping Village, where everything comes together in transcendent consonance? As soon as you step in, a gargoyle warns you not to harm any of the villagers while also noting another danger at work here. It's an excellent introduction that we'll never see again in the game, whereby we must exercise our heroic notions in preserving the innocent while dashing the efforts of an evil at work throughout our time here. A marvelously curious tone set for us, the player, as we venture into this enigma of a town. It is paced out and excellently well. You spend time avoiding the villagers while piecing the puzzle of the village together. Finding one item after another in addition to reading the text scattered within these structures continuously grants the player a sense of progress, though left still to decipher how this village connects within itself. Every rune has a specific and thought-out purpose, which keeps you attentive to your surroundings, making note of where you may not have explored yet, or returning to an older building only to see you missed a rune or mechanic to continue on with. I still stumble upon my memory of the village's progression from time to time during subsequent playthroughs. As you get the hang of the level and gather most of the items you need, the guards arrive. It's brilliant. Just as we were getting comfortable moving about the village, a paradigm shift sets in, and we now have more entities trying to end our existence than before, though many villagers notably disappear at this point. It may have been a design choice to simplify the space usage for us as a player combating Xerox agents, but I choose to interpret this change as a demonstration of what humanity remains in the townsfolk, that their attacks on Dan are an extension of their fear and confusion rather than sheer malice, but then know true evil when they see it and seek shelter in the comfort of their homes as they would have done so originally prior to their said humanity robbed of them, save a couple poor souls unwilling to do so like this chap. The lighting and art direction are exceptional, with the design and coloration of what we see providing a sense of dispossession. The village feels lifeless in its nighttime aesthetic, fitting given that what life once was here is now consumed by magic. The peculiar architecture of housing and centers caressing one another with their slanted roofs is a delicacy for the eyes, even all these years later. Then the music, with its stirring overtones like an enchanted forest, yields something of a mystical nature, spellbinding in its notation and a dark casting of chants that flow from bombastic to sorrowful. A remarkable piece to shadow cast this gloomy town, its mysterious lake and curious entryways, as we attempt to save Galamir from the very twisted and tragic reality of Xerox magic. Everything we see is elevated, every visual set to a greater concept in our minds by the framing of a tone that is at home within the cradle of such an enchanting number. Bob and Barn, take a bow. This could very well have been your best. It's also worth noting that the library here houses some of the most literature you'll find in a single location, remarking on Xerox, Dan, King Peregrine, and each of the heroes we find in our beloved Chalice Hall. They're humorously written too, naturally, so I often go through a bit each time I play and have a good laugh as I always did before. Let us take one final glance at the remake in its labor of love for the Sleeping Village. What's brought to life is the well-lighted windows and sky vista stretching around this town, juxtaposed in beautiful contrast to the darkened surroundings of your steps within the alleyways. Detail is generously given in certain spaces, and the colorized tones once darkened gives one an interesting new manner in experiencing this wonderful region. Other Ocean, thank you so much. Now, tell Sony to let you remake MediEvil 2. The level is a puzzle of puzzles, which when rendered together make it into a monument of powerful game design. I do not have anything bad to say of this level other than, which I say for every level I adore, I wish there was more of it. I wish they had added access to just a couple more buildings, another rune, maybe another key item to make use of in unlocking the Mayor's Manor. The Sleeping Village remains one of my favorite gaming experiences to date, and the reason for why this list was made and now presented to you, dear viewer. And even though I know the solution without any reference, it reminds me with immersive joy and passion for the first and compelling encounter I had with this magnificent piece in MediEvil. This is, I believe, the beacon of the series, an example of what heights can be achieved in both game design and human experience. There is a kind of poetry in it, a substance of timeless bravery tempered by the thoughtfulness in its overall arrangement, and a creation that by fortune and daring creativity allows its mark to be indelibly left in gaming and as a sigil for human access to the sublime. That is no exaggeration. The Sleeping Village has achieved in my life what Shadow of the Colossus and Mario Galaxy have by way of their valorous philosophies awakening an appreciation of self and the artistic mind that we are a living part of in this world. It is not the only level on this list to have accomplished such an experience for me personally, but it always has been the Sleeping Village that captured me with its arresting atmosphere and world that I've never been able to let go of. Thank goodness for that. And so, the gold chalice is given here, both as my favorite medieval level and one of my personal greatest experiences within this medium that we call gaming. Allow me, if I may, to conclude with an excerpt of Percy Shelley. With fairest smiles of wonder thrown on that which is indeed our own, and which in distant lands will be the dearest playmate unto thee. Ah, what a lovely poem. Hi! What did you think? 60 levels done and dusted. We're all finished. Finally. Wow, that was a long run. Almost 3 hours. Excellent. As I said at the beginning of this video, the goal was just to have fun, to enjoy ourselves here. So I hope you were able to kick back and shut out the world for a little bit as you got to enjoy the content here. If you made it to this point, if you even made it here, thank you. I appreciate you sticking around and just enjoying the content. As you can see, I'm pretty new at this, and it's a lot to learn. But I've had quite a blast doing this, and I've learned a little bit about myself. I guess that's kind of something that comes as a natural repercussion of taking on a major project like this. It's only my 3rd video ever, so it probably wasn't a good idea to do something this massive then, but I couldn't help myself. This is a passion project that I've been wanting to do for a long time. So if you did make it to this point, thank you so much for sticking around. And hey, what did you think of the actual content itself? What did you think of the level placements? Did you agree with some and disagree with others? Did you think number 2 should have been at number 4? Do you think number 50 was completely shafted unfairly and should have been at number 32 or 22 or something like that? I would like to hear those thoughts and why below in classic YouTube ranking fashion. But for the future, I would like to do something like this again for another series that I love. Obviously, MediEvil is something I'm crazy about, but there are other series as well. So maybe I will give that series the treatment I did today for something like this. We'll see. For now, I have some other ideas to pursue, which will be shorter in nature. But we will see what happens this year as time goes, and if I do get any feedback, if this is something that does relatively well as a video and it starts to grow any kind of community, then I will listen to those suggestions as well. But enough about that. We are all done here, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you for stopping by. Take care.